Yeah, you had a question, Commissioner?
Yes, so as far as the tree ordinance goes, what specifically are you looking? Just curious, what are some of your thoughts on what you're looking for? In my county, for example, we have one, but effectively it lets you cut any tree down and pay a fine, so just curious what.
So this was actually something I think that Alana was spearheading before I became the chair, working with like the Florida Urban Forestry Council and some of those professionals and experts to see what they recommend and also inform, because again, you know, it's that partnership between legislative and science, sometimes that troubled marriage, and just informing so that we're able to have the experts and the legislators come together a little easier. So a model ordinance would kind of be a draft that would compile, like you said, different ordinances that exist, or as kind of a roadmap for somebody or a area entity that is looking to, you know, adopt an ordinance. So they have some place to go. And then, you know, it can be a working document, but ultimately it just gives you a starting point based on.
I can
best
add
practice.
something. So, I don't think I've actually brought this up to this group, but recently, I guess in the past year, we started meeting, with staff from all of our local governments about tree management and how we can strengthen some of our protections for trees through our code and other policies. And so, we're actually meeting on Monday, and essentially what Natasha said is really what the discussions are, in addition to talking about like bulk pricing for trees, with nurseries, and then narratives on trees and resiliency, because after storms, everyone just wants to go and cut all their trees down. And that's not helping the situation. And so, yeah, we meet with staff, and then, you know, arborists, local arborists, and, you know, some professors from USF have been joining those meetings. And ideally, we help support some sort of a model ordinance, or just even compiling sort of best practices that we've seen. And then we also heard that the state is working on developing some sort of a model ordinance too. So we want to support those efforts.
Well, anything that you come up with, please bring back to this group so we can look into it and discuss it, contribute ideas, because we want this to be something really solid. Any questions anyone wants to ask Natasha about her committee meeting?
Yeah, and now that we're at
Anything?
the end of the state session
Well,
too.
listen, you please be sure to bring back to us any recommendations that this group could take a look at and comment on. Because I know the commissioner and certainly all, yeah, Colleen, ask her.
I know our planning commission last week had an in-depth discussion about the clear cutting of lots. So I would love to see the best practices, and that we're trying to figure out, wrap our heads around how we can better help the developers do better on some of the way that they're clear cutting these lots, especially in our county. It's up close and personal right now. So we would definitely love to participate in that discussion.
Okay, well,
Because
we
county
can
staff
ask,
actually started that group.
Good, okay,
yeah,
I
they're
figured so,
very
because
involved.
there's been some good discussions, but I haven't seen it move, so it's good to have a bigger group
right.
at the table with us than just us trying to wade our way through this alone.
Let's bring that back to this group, Alana, because everybody's got their perspectives and concerns. Yeah, we'd appreciate hearing anything that you have in mind. Anyone else want to comment about that? Yes, ma'am.
We have Nancy Stevens on with her hand raised.
Hello. Yes, this is Nancy Stevens. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, I'm with the Sierra Club, and I'm also a founding member of the Tampa Tree Advocacy Group. So I'd love to talk with you, Natasha, about the Tampa Tree Ordinance, which is good in some ways, and we have things we'd like to improve. So, you know, it's been in effect for 6 years now, and so if you have time, you want to talk at some point Monday, we do have a meeting with a tree meeting. So, you know, I'm not available Monday, but if you want to talk at some point about the Tampa Tree Ordinance and what is good about, you know, what's good in it about protecting trees and what could be improved to protect trees more. I'd like to speak with you about it.
I think that's part of what this group is supposed to do. If you've got some concerns or suggestions, Yeah, I think everyone would appreciate it. Of course, each area is going to have different kinds of concerns and issues,
Mhm.
but everybody's got something to contribute. I mean, what are you doing?
Mhm.
Sounds a lot like Manatee County, where, if you want to pay the money, you can cut the trees down,
Mhm.
you know, obviously the recent state legislation that gives property owners the rights to do whatever they want with trees, pretty much across the board. Residential properties has been challenging. As was stated, after the storms, a lot of healthy trees got taken down just because people were afraid next year. So we're trying to manage that, and I think something like this would be helpful, especially if we weren't an outlier, if other cities had similar rules.
Okay,
Mhm.
let's put that then into our future meeting.
Yeah,
Any
and
other comments? And
Just
just
to-
say your name if you're on, yeah, okay.
just to kind of wrap that up too, you know, if you have emerging topics like this that you know you're getting a lot of public interest or commissioner interest, or, you know, feel like your legislative climate, even locally or regionally, is moving in that direction, feel free to bring it to us. You know, we'd be happy to look at it, have presenters, you know, and anybody can attend. Usually our legislative review commission or committee meetings are virtual. So, you know, if you have someone that you want to just send to one of the meetings, I do want to have some more frequently during the off-state session, just so that we can kind of, you know, share information and see where there's common ground to move this momentum forward, you know, and be a resource for you through the.
Well, did you have any one or two or three major issues that carry over in your mind that we need to be aware of?
The ones that emerge are the tree ordinance, the lighting ordinance, also fertilizer or nutrient production kind of activities. And those that are the fine line between preemption and what we can do locally. So just trying to kind of interpret that, get information out, share information and whatnot, so that we can have those conversations and help inform everybody.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
This is Maya Burke. I know that that group has largely been focused on state and local policy, but I think there are a couple of things that are federal policy that are relevant. One is that the National Estuary Program is authorized through 2026. So there'll be a push to reauthorize the National Estuary Program, which means both Sarasota Bay and Tampa Bay Estuary Program will be coming up for reauthorization. And right now it looks like we do have 4 bipartisan sponsors. So whether or not things move enough in DC and there is, you know, sufficient support broadly is still a question, but it would be nice to have local support for that reauthorization. Just as a reminder, that reauthorization process is what basically sets the ceiling for how much money can be appropriated to national estuary programs. And so that is helping to bring federal resources back to the local governments every year. Right now, we are authorized up to $1 million per year. We've never had a full appropriation of that full authorized amount. Right now, we're at $850,000 per estuary program per year. But I think that would be something to have on the radar. And then just to remind you all too, that we have a wild and scenic study for the Little Manatee River that's ongoing right now. And once that study is done, then there will be a determination of whether or not the Little Manatee River qualifies as a wild and scenic river for the federal designation, which will bring, again, more federal resources down to the Little Manatee River area to help manage that resource. And so that's just something to keep on your radar. It's not active right now, but it will be probably coming up in the next year or so.
Maya, be sure to keep us updated with that, and we'll be more than happy to schedule whatever time is necessary for you to make that presentation, as it is with any of the rest of you that are involved in some of these major projects, because we're covering a lot of territory here, and the whole purpose is to try to share and collect our ideas. Sir, say your name before you.
John Oving, Friends of the River, Friends of the Hillsborough River. Maya, could you get in touch with us about wild and scenic rivers, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have one more question, I'm sorry.
No,
a
don't
comment
apologize.
about
That's fine. Go ahead.
Natasha, Colleen Weaver with Pasco County. The educational portion, we talk about fertilizer nutrient reductions and with hurricane season coming up. And, it feels like, we could do something educational, public service announcement about this. I don't know if I don't recall seeing much information come out. But it'd be really nice to have a regional approach on that so that everybody's in lockstep with that messaging. And I know we're struggling, as we prepare for hurricane season, what in the heavy rain we had last night even was great. But as we're out there, it feels like we could really take advantage of this season with some kind of, going on cable TV or something we could do. I know we just had a update on our Operation Trap. Pasco, it was in a NOAA grant. It was our first one. And we're trapping plastics in cigarette butts from going into the Gulf of Mexico. It's interesting to see. We just had our very first year finish. And they have some information. The University of Florida has some great information just in the first year of everything we were able to keep out of the Gulf. So that runoff, I'd love to figure out how to partner with them on what what they've learned so far. I know it's only 1 year in, but it was significant. I mean, in Citrus County, their number one thing they kept out of the waterway was cigarette butts. And that's so scary to think about, all of this washing into the stormwater drains. But I just feel like there's something we could do to overlap and get people's awareness. And if we
Well,
can, that would be
Colleen,
great.
what you can do, what I'm gonna recommend to you is let's put this together, do a presentation here. And then we'll be in the position to take it to the regional council where all of the regional leaders can learn from what you're doing. I mean,
Okay.
that's the whole purpose of this thing.
We had water
Willing-
boats.
Would you be willing to do that?
Well, I will have someone that knows what they're talking about do it, but,
That's-
that was just one of the very important pieces of everything moving forward with that nitrogen reduction. I think it overlaps with it completely.
Yeah, it seems to.
Yeah, and I would say, because there's such a variety of different ordinances and activities with that, I think that would be a good thing for us to look at on the legislative review committee and just see what could be proposed from those that are participating there, and then we can bring it back here and see if something would work.
Yeah, and be prepared to bring it back here as soon as you can, because everybody else here is gonna wanna learn
And we're in the.
and participate in making some recommendations to the regional council. Yes.
Just to kind of wrap up and talk to your point, Colleen, about regional messaging related to stormwater, we did develop a big campaign working with all of our local government staff called Stormwater Stewardship Month. That was during the month of May. And so we have a whole webpage on our website. If you go out to our resources tab, you'll find it. And we have a bunch of educational graphics related to what stormwater is. We compare stormwater to surge. Telling people that stormwater doesn't get treated before it mostly doesn't get treated before it goes out to our water bodies. And then, we also focus on specific issues related to stormwater, from debris to, your yard waste to everything else. And so definitely check out that website, because we worked with a bunch of different staff to do that. And we also have a proclamation on there, proclamation template, and several of our local governments ended up passing that, designating May as Stormwater Stewardship Month. So next year we hope to have an even bigger Stormwater Stewardship Month effort. So
I would just love a little video or a snippet to put on Facebook or on
Yeah,
some of
we
the
created
social
that too.
media. You did?
Yes.
Haven't seen it. I wonder why our county didn't share it.
Yeah.
I would love to have our county share it.
I'm gonna ask her to get it together,
Okay.
present it.
Thank you.
Because
That would be
I
good.
mean,
Yeah.
you get online and you get so many things that's overwhelming. That should be
I
enough.
would love to see the video. Thank you.
You're right, thank you. All right, Maya, you're gonna do a presentation for us on State of the Bay 2024.
Part two that we didn't get to. Do you want me to stand up here or just talk?
Yeah, I think do so that we can hear you better.
Well, thank you for having me back so that we can cover everything that I didn't get to during my last presentation. I know some of this information, some of you have seen before, but essentially I just want to give you a high level overview for all of the different indicators that you all collect data for and that we synthesize to report on progress, status, and trends so that you can sort of get a holistic picture of the condition of the health of the watershed in the Bay proper. So next slide.
There's a clicker up there, Maya. There's a clicker there.
Oh.
If you just point that towards Megan's computer, it'll change your slide.
So we've got a variety of indicators, and they're mostly focused on our three program priority areas: clean waters and sediments, thriving habitats and abundant wildlife, and an informed, engaged, and responsible community. So I'm going to start off with the super sexy stuff, the benthic index. So the benthic index is really looking at a couple of different things. This into minimize this so everybody can see it on the screen. Okay, so the benthic index is really looking at the overall health of the organisms that live in basically the mud in the bottom sediments in the bay. And this is something that the Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County has collected data, and many of you from your local counties have also contributed to those data collection and laboratory analyses. But this essentially is giving us a snapshot at the bottom of the food chain. How are things looking? It also tells us really important information about how heavy metals, pesticides, and other contaminants of concern are accumulating in those bottom sediments. So for 2023, this is an indicator that lags a little bit longer than some of our others. So the most recent data that we have to report on is from 2023. You can see that most bay segments are in that cautionary category. The exception is Lower Tampa Bay, where the benthic index is still looking really good and healthy. So that means in Lower Tampa Bay, you have less pesticides, less toxic contaminants, less heavy metals, and you also have a greater variety and abundance of things like worms, stuff that really makes up, like I said, the bottom of that food chain. But probably the thing you guys care most about, and I know we spend a lot of time communicating to the public, is what about water quality overall? Well, this is just a reminder that what I synthesized for you down to this really simple graphic of, red, yellow, and green is basically taking a bunch of different factors related to both chlorophyll or algae growth in the water and light attenuation, how clear the water is, how sunlight is able to make the surface of the bay down to the bottom. And basically we're looking at whether or not we're meeting established scientific targets related to each of those parameters, and then we synthesize that together, and that's how we're able to get to an annual look at whether or not the bay is in good enough shape to support some grass resources. So I'll start at the top so you can really focus in as I dive in deeper, but you'll see for 2024, almost every bay segment, Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, Middle Tampa Bay is in the green, and Lower Tampa Bay is the bay segment that struggled in 2024, and it's in the yellow. And for those of you who've been around for a while, that ought to be a fairly surprising result. We're used to seeing really the best water quality conditions in Lower Tampa Bay, and things like Hillsborough Bay and particularly Old Tampa Bay tend to struggle. That's not what we saw in 2024. We think this is mostly a result of how good and clear we really expect Lower Tampa Bay to be day in and day out. It's really on the nice edge in terms of how much play it has. And those hurricanes really did affect the water clarity, and we did see some algae blooms as a result of the amount of rainfall and runoff that we received in 2024. And it really just sort of teetered over because it had both scores of too much algae and not enough light penetration getting to the bay bottom there in Lower Tampa Bay. But it wasn't far off. So it's in that cautionary category, but I have every expectation that back in 2025, Lower Tampa Bay is going to bounce back and be just fine.
I also want to say that just because Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, and Middle Tampa Bay are in the green on an annual basis, that doesn't mean things are perfect there everywhere. For each of those dots that are colored, that tells you an individual station where the Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County is going out and collecting these water samples. And you can see in both space and time, there are certain stations that had conditions which exceeded that overall bay segment target for that area. So there's definitely hotspots of algae growth in both Old Tampa Bay and Hillsborough Bay, as well as Middle Tampa Bay. And if you look at that data, we'll dive in a little bit about when we tended to see those really higher values overall. But just because things on an annual basis are green doesn't mean we didn't see localized problems in some parts of those areas. I can walk and chew gum. So we did something a little bit different at our last TAC meeting because we're really trying to re-engage and make sure that you all are building how these management approaches together with us. And so what we're really trying to do is make sure that people understand all of the work that goes into that simple stoplight graphic, because it's not just green is good, yellow, you're teetering on the edge, and red is trouble. It's building in and upon a whole lot of science and a connection to action. So I just want to walk through a little bit about how we create those really simplified graphics that tell the story. And it all starts off and ties into the management paradigm that we've established here in Tampa Bay. And that is the story that you all have heard me tell about 1,000,001 times, which is that we control nitrogen pollution. We do that so that we decrease the algae growth in the water column. That leads to clearer water that sunlight is able to make it through from the surface to the bottom in order to support seagrasses so that we can reach our goal of having 40,000 acres of seagrass in Tampa Bay. That's the management paradigm. And so I want to start out by talking about how we do control nutrient pollution, and we report on that in 5-year increments through the reasonable assurance process. And that's how we're able to generate these graphics where we can say confidently that the majority of nutrient pollution that's going into Tampa Bay is coming from stormwater sources. That's a priority place in order to control that nutrient pollution in order to achieve the goals that are outlined in this management paradigm. So if we move on to the decreasing algae component based on the amount of nitrogen load reductions that we are seeing, I want to sort of report on how chlorophyll conditions or algae growth looked in the bay in 2024. And here you can see for every single bay segment in 2024, they all exceeded, we had more algae in those bay segments than the targets that we've established, the management targets that the desired condition for each of those bay segments. The exception is Hillsborough Bay, where we saw less algae in that bay segment than the target that's there. So even though even though Middle Tampa Bay and Old Tampa Bay are in the green, they still had more algae last year than we would like, but that's not enough to pop them into that cautionary category. So if we look at long-term chlorophyll trends overall, you'll basically see this is thinking about chlorophyll on long time scales, on an annual time scale, over decades of time, right? So you can see the historical perspective is there's still quite a bit less algae in the bay than there was back in the 1970s and 80s. And that's because our nitrogen reduction strategy is working. But you'll see in recent years, in certain bay segments in particular, we really are flirting back up with those limits of sort of what you would expect to be a tipping point in the bay's condition. So why is that? Why are recent years looking different overall? Well, I think understanding the connection between rainfall and seagrass and chlorophyll is really important. This isn't really complicated science. It's pretty well understood. But we've had some interesting things happen in recent years. And if you look here at this chart, it's basically contextualizing the last couple of years with respect to how much we've deviated from the annual average rainfall. So you'll see 2023 was an outlier, and that's because it was a super dry year. In portions of the watershed, I'm thinking mostly like areas like coastal Manatee County, you saw less than 20 inches of rainfall in 2023. That's bonkers. As a region, we're usually around 52 inches, 53 inches of rain a year. So 2023, super dry year.
There's a lot of reasons that's not good for things like water supply or freshwater wetlands. But it just so happens that coastal ecosystems tend to do pretty good with drought because it means less stormwater runoff. So we actually had quite a bit of adaptive capacity rolling into 2024 because of that extreme drought. So for seagrasses, it was maybe okay, but for all the other things, maybe it created some challenges for us as a region. Then you back that up to what we saw in 2024, which was the wettest year on record for our region. And so with all of those big storms, the bay is able to assimilate quite a bit of the nutrient that comes with all of that rainfall and runoff because of that dry year that we're coming off on, but it definitely still taxes and stresses the system. And it does that in several different ways. But I just kind of want to show you again, I showed you these things, the piano roll that sort of summarizes it at a stoplight. That's an annual kind of condition, but if you dig down deeper and look at chlorophyll trends on a monthly basis, you can see we were really well below the average chlorophyll in every single bay segment for the early part of 2024. But then once the summer rainy season started, and then certainly once the hurricanes came through, that's when we started to see high amounts of algae in the water, which is what you'd expect when you get these kind of perturbations that come through. And those kinds of conditions are basically what are driving the averages on an annual basis for Tampa Bay. So what's to blame for those chlorophyll conditions that were exceedingly high in the early fall and the late summer? Well, I know there was a lot of information in the news and a lot of concern about wastewater discharges. Those are certainly never good, not something that we support, but I do really want to contextualize those wastewater spills with the amount of water that's literally just pumping through as it's draining over the land in our major rivers, because we have 4 major rivers that are draining to Tampa Bay. That's the whole deal of what makes this a productive ecosystem, where the river water mixes with the Gulf water in order to give us this productive ecosystem that is Tampa Bay. And so you can see here with the passages of Debbie, Helene, and Milton, they really just sort of skew the overall graph here to look at the flows. We saw a total peak flows of more than 36,000 cubic feet per second, which is quite a bit. And this volume of water, just to try and help you wrap your mind around what it is, it's 250 times greater than the volumes of wastewater that are discharged to the bay. So if you want to know the major sources of nutrient loading and things that are going to the bay from these hurricanes and the end of summer rainy season, river flows are really important for understanding that. But we know sanitary sewer overflows also have a significant impact. Part of that's because the kind of nitrogen and nutrients that are delivered there is particularly bioavailable to support algae growth. And also because it poses lots of other important things that we're concerned about for human health and safety. So this graph is looking at all of the sanitary sewer overflows that were recorded to the state reporting portal in 2024. So you can see for most of the year, we really didn't have too much at all in the way of sanitary sewer overflows. When we did see sanitary sewer overflows, they really did coincide with those wet weather conditions associated with tropical storms or hurricanes that were passing by or affecting our region directly. So whether it was from storm surge and associated capacity shutdowns and then overwhelming the system from there, or from rainfall that's inflowing and infiltrating into the wastewater treatment infrastructure, that is really when we saw these the greatest amount of discharges. And I also want to just draw your attention to, this is color-coded by bay segment. The community, perhaps not you all, but the community, the public more broadly, still is very top of mind what happened in 2015 and 2016 in the region. And there's certainly a perception that there's more or less one bad actor in the region, and that's the only place where these sanitary sewer overflows are happening. I just want to call your attention to, in fact, it's not just one entity, it's all of us. We're all challenged by these extreme conditions. There is not a wastewater treatment utility operator that didn't have some kind of struggle with the extreme conditions that we saw in 2024. And probably the hardest struggling facilities were just ones that discharge to the Manatee River, making up the bulk of the discharges that happened in 2024. And so that's something new for our region and support that we need to, give to those wastewater utilities to make sure that they're investing in hardening and maintaining that aging infrastructure so that they are more resilient to these kinds of extreme events going forward, and so that they're able to do better in sunny day conditions as well. And that's a big number and a lot to think about. And if you don't contextualize it with your history, if you don't know your history, you might, think it's worse than it really is. So I just kind of want to show you here. This is a graph showing sanitary sewer overflows between 2017 and 2024. We started 2017 because that's when the state really started collecting those data, and that was in response to legislation and community outcry from discharges that happened before. It used to be very hard to synthesize this information to communicate it to you as an indicator of overall bay health because the data were all in text form through the state warning system. It was just not something that you could pull very easily and then summarize up. There's a lot of caveats to this data, but you can see over the course of time, 2024 on this chart looks like a pretty bad year, given everything that we know about 90 million gallons of wastewater overflows in 2024. That's not good. But I will say that those events in 2016 that led to better reporting here were more than 200 million gallons of wastewater that were spilled. And as a result of that, folks like in Pinellas County started the Pinellas County Stormwater Wastewater Task Force, and folks throughout all the region really did make a concerted effort to work on maintaining this aging infrastructure, lining pipes, putting in manhole covers, different kinds of things, increasing the sewer capacity. So while 90 million gallons is not good, not ideal, I'm never going to support that. It's a pretty significant reduction to where we were about 10 years ago as a region. And so I think while we should hold our communities accountable to maintaining this infrastructure and to doing better so that our water is clean to recreate and swim and fish and have fun, we should also acknowledge the level of investment and commitment they've had to get this number down to only 90 million gallons, given the wettest year on record and really extreme storms and challenges faced to the region. Okay, so all of that is kind of driving the chlorophyll or algae blooms in the bay. What does that mean for light penetration? Because we know that light penetration is really important. We have to make it so that light can make it to the bay bottom in order to compose some grasses, which are plants which need light and able to grow and thrive. And here you'll see, even though most of the segments in Tampa Bay had more algae than we would hope growing there, they still had adequate light penetration to support seagrasses. The exception is Lower Tampa Bay. So because Lower Tampa Bay basically exceeded the targets that we have for both chlorophyll and for light attenuation, that's why Lower Tampa Bay got the yellow color this year. So we do all this for seagrasses. I'm going to pop over this stuff pretty quickly because I don't want to steal Chris A's thunder. But I just want to say that in addition to the mapping programs that the Southwest Florida Water Management District does, you all and other partners throughout the region help us by monitoring seagrass transects throughout the bay at fixed sites. We go there once a year, every year, so that we can get not just an overall acreage coverage, but we can also get a snapshot of what species is there, what's its condition, how long are the blade lengths, what kind of epiphytes are growing on it. We want to sort of do a more detailed workup. And here you can see that in every bay segment, Middle Tampa Bay, Lower Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, we're seeing the line go in the right direction, which is up. We want the line to go up, which means we're having more seagrasses in each of those bay segments. The outlier, unfortunately, is Old Tampa Bay. And so based on these data and the on-the-ground ground truthing that you all help to provide, when the Southwest Florida Water Management District comes out with their seagrass mapping, what we would expect to see is increases in every bay segment except for Old Tampa Bay. I'm gonna skip my next slide, let Chris cover that. We care about seagrasses for lots of reasons. It's the foundation to a healthy bay. One of the reasons it's so important is because it's a critical habitat for fish at all of their different life stages, particularly juvenile life stages. And so we report on things like fish and crab health through the Nectin Index.
This is generally a lagging indicator as well. It takes longer to synthesize these data. So the most recent information I have is from 2023, not from 2024. But you'll see for all base segments, we're either in the cautionary category or we're just flirting with getting out of that cautionary category into the maintain status. This is generally because what happened in 2021, we saw a significant red tide flow throughout all of Tampa Bay. There was quite a bit of die-off that's associated with that, and it takes fish and crab communities time to recover, to build back. And so that's really what we think is that this index is responding. It's showing that the fish populations are resilient. They are in the process of bouncing back, but they're still not all the way recovered to where we would hope that they are, especially given the amount of seagrasses and other positive signs that we're seeing in the majority of bay segments. All right, I'm going to move on to habitats. So this basically, we take land use, land cover, and we analyze all of the land use, land cover maps for the entire watershed. So not just looking at seagrass, but also looking at things like tidal flats, oyster bars, mangroves, marshes, salt barrens, coastal uplands, forested freshwater wetlands, non-forested freshwater wetlands, and native upland habitats like pine flatwoods, to kind of give you a sense of the direction of where things are headed. We are waiting with bated breath on new land use, land cover data from the Southwest Florida Water Management District that's going to help us update this. But generally, you'll see things like mangroves are doing really well. We're still not trending in a direction to meet our seagrass targets. Things like salt marshes continue to decline, mostly at the expense of mangrove habitat, which is why mangroves are doing so well. Non-forested freshwater wetlands tend to be pretty well protected given the regulatory schemas that are out there. So we see those on trend to be the target. But things like forested freshwater systems, particularly in our riparian riverine systems, are trending downward. So this is just, like I said, a high level snapshot to give you an idea of what needs help, what doesn't need as much help. But all of these habitats are really important, and we're going to continue to track the status and trends of each of them. And this is just to let you all know that you've really picked up the pace of progress over the 2024 time period. You all completed 81 projects, invested more money than you have for the past few years. This map is showing you where those projects, the gray dots are the historical projects that you have completed, and the teal dots are the ones that were completed in 2024. You can see the bulk, the majority of the projects that were completed in 2024 are upland projects like pine flatwoods. That's it. All the things, Tampa Bay, status and trends. Not one thing is an easy story to tell, but that sort of gives you an idea of where we need to make progress and where we're on track to do well with things.
Okay, that's quite a bit of information. You need to stay up there because I'm sure some of y'all have any questions, comments you'd like to make.
Two quick questions on these targets. Light attenuation, is that set at 6 feet as appropriate?
Appropriate?
Well, what's your target? You're looking at sufficient or?
Yeah. So it's not set at 6 feet. It's KD, and let's see. It's different for each bay segment. Here, this is in meters. And this is based on the science, from the early and mid 1990s, how much light penetration is necessary to support seagrasses. And, I kind of alluded to the moment that we're at in managing Tampa Bay is, for a long time, it's just sort of been reporting on status and trends based on the science that those giants who walked before us did in the early 1990s. And we're kind of coming up to a point where we need to maybe tweak or revise some of these targets, and we need to build these things together based on science. And so I think I have a hard time kind of expressing like how this all fits together, but the importance of having these numeric
targets is really important. Not because the target itself does a darn thing to make Tampa Bay better, but because it indicates to us a logic model for how the ecosystem functions. And when you see a project, when you see a trend that's going in the wrong direction, that indicator kind of gives you, the kinds of projects that you need to do to make that indicator trend in a better direction. And so these colors that we put here, green means continue doing the planned projects, research, and monitoring. It doesn't mean do nothing, sit back, right? It means continue what you're doing, it's working. Caution means that, so that yellow color means that, hey, you need to look into this, you need to investigate this a little bit further. If you let it go, you're gonna probably slip into that problematic red territory. And that red territory is when you need to not only continue, so you need to continue your planned projects, you need to keep investing in science and rethink your management paradigms, but you also actively need to engage in projects that are addressing those indicators that are trending in the wrong direction. And that's really important because for Old Tampa Bay, which we've seen sort of flirt in this yellow and red territory now for a decade, we've sort of been in this, continue on with monitoring, maybe do some investigations, but we've sort of been stuck in this loop of the action piece of things. There are really specific actions, I think, that the data are pointing us towards, namely things like reducing nutrient pollution so that you can get, right.
We see these trends going up and down, and I have two questions. Number one, translate it to the guy on the street or to the officials, either in the private sector or the public sector, that might make some decisions that would improve it, okay? So, in common language, how can we help? Are there areas particularly where we can make some recommendations, where maybe more sanitary treatment needs to take place? Are there utilities that can be targeted for certain areas where a county commission or a city would need the support so they can focus on getting more equipment or initiatives to cut down sanitary sewer? No, I mean this now, because I love these presentations. But I'm not, but I ultimately, I think every one of us that's sitting here, including yourself particularly, we've done the study, we've seen these trends. Now, what can we do to make it more positive? As a group, as a regional council, what kinds of things can we do? Are there specific recommendations that we can translate all this scientific language into palatable recommendations? We will support you, City of Timbuktu, or we will make these recommendations to help you convince the public that they need to do A, B, C. So translate that for me.
Yeah, I think the Bay segment that requires action is Old Tampa Bay. And that's because we're seeing too much algae. And for a long time, we weren't sure if the reason we were seeing so much algae in there, we weren't exactly sure if it was performing the way we would expect based on this logic model. But we've done more science because we've been in this yellow part, this yellow land of evaluate things and make sure that you're on the right track. And when we delved into it in more detail, what it showed was Old Tampa Bay has not seen the same kind of nitrogen load reductions as other Bay segments, and it's performing as you would then expect. So we need to further reduce nitrogen loads in Old Tampa Bay. There are other things that we could do that could help Old Tampa Bay, but nitrogen load reductions are the most reliable way that you're going to improve water quality in the Old Tampa Bay segment. And it can't just be wastewater treatment, because that's not going to get us enough nitrogen load reduction in that Bay segment, although it is part of that. So things like removing surface water discharges to Old Tampa Bay will be helpful. For those utilities with a discharge, not with a surface water discharge, but with reclaimed water that are serving in the Old Tampa Bay segment area,
It's very important that that reclaimed water has been treated to advanced wastewater treatment standards and that they're not putting, you know, nearly 20 milligrams per liter of total nitrogen in the reclaimed water and applying it in this bay segment. So there are particular utilities in this bay segment, their reclaimed water quality is not up to par with what we need, and that would be an important nitrogen load reduction. Then also in this bay segment, we need to tackle stormwater. There are significant stormwater nutrient sources in this area. So we need to invest in regional stormwater treatment. I don't think one municipality can do it on their own. We'll sort of band together and invest in some of these large scale projects like the celery fields down in Sarasota. We need to see that kind of investment going on there. And the third recommendation I would give is we've done quite a bit to replumb the watershed in Old Tampa Bay. And so we're diverting fresh water to this bay segment that naturally wouldn't have drained there. We need to find beneficial uses for that fresh water that's not just directly dumping it into Old Tampa Bay. And I don't think that you know, wetland restoration or putting it back, like I'm talking about Lake Tarpon in particular, putting it back out to the Gulf is the way to do it. I think as a region, we're growing and we have great demand for alternative water supplies. And I think Lake Tarpon Outfall Canal water represents a significant opportunity where we could utilize that water as an alternative water supply, put it into a reservoir, and then provide that clean, fresh drinking water to the region. With that means that we're also not putting the nutrients that are in that water into that Old Tampa Bay segment. We're restoring the salinity conditions. We're doing those sorts of things. Those would be my primary tactics for
So
reducing
these-
nitrogen loads in the Old Tampa Bay segment.
Okay.
And that's not to say that some of these other beneficial things ought to be abandoned and not pursued. I think it's really important that we keep them on the shelf. But my job is to tell you the thing that's like the good money. Where is it worth spending that's going to return on your investment? Sorry, guys, it's the nitrogen load reductions. It's nothing new. It's what these guys told you back in the early 1990s. It's the same story. We thought maybe something different was going on. We looked at it. It's not.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, Ben Copeland with Mosaic. Thanks for that. So I really appreciated the way you really simplified the rainfall trend analysis. I stole a picture because I really like the way you set that up. And I think that it's really easy to understand like how a tropical storm or hurricane can flush water, you know, from the rivers and the watershed down. But like Helene was not a rainmaker for most people, but it was very impactful. So how does that, like, what is our understanding or our assessment of how that might affect either the benthic or the water quality and light penetration as a result of that storm?
Yeah, so Helene, you're right, it was not a rainfall event, and so what we tended to see in Helene is certain plants that are essentially vulnerable to things like storm surge that had to close down. And if folks continued to flush their toilets even when the plant wasn't operational, you can still exceed and overwhelm the capacity, and the plant is not treating at that point in time. So you could still see discharges overall. So I think we have good information that is kind of showing where we saw these wastewater treatment plant sanitary sewer overflows. You did see the uptick. Algae are capitalizing that super available nutrients to fuel algae growth. We don't have as much information on the benthos yet. And that's just because those data take longer to process to report on. But I will say that each year, so there's routine benthic monitoring that goes on. So we'll get the results for 2024 later this year, and we'll report back to you all when we get those. But we also have an opportunity to do special study sites each year. And so for 2025, what we're doing is we're targeting those special study sites in some areas where we know in the Manatee River in particular that we're experiencing these overflows so that we can see if there is a connection at all to the overall benthic health. I guess I want to say, like, my scientist hat would tell you, like, I wouldn't count on it for like much. We see that these indices are highly variable in general. After Piney Point, we did a special study area near Bishop Harbor and the creek and the port and all of the areas where the discharge occurred there. And we expected to see things, you know, like show up. It's really kind of a crapshoot.
Okay. Are there any commissioner?
Hi, Commissioner Sadiq, Manatee County, Lower Tampa Bay. Yeah, kind of curious as to why that was listed as a cautionary area for 24. I have a few theories. I'm just curious what you found.
Yeah, I really do think that it's mostly because the threshold, the targets are so much lower in that bay segment because we expect water to be very clear, excellent water quality down there. When you combine that with both a system that was affected by storm surge from Helene, rainfall from Debbie, rainfall from Milton, that's a significant amount of nutrients from stormwater, as well as you had the largest amount of wastewater overflows in the Manatee River, which discharges into lower Tampa Bay. So I think you just saw like a great slug of nutrients going into that bay segment. And what we really saw was, a fairly mild red tide bloom that persisted there over time. So you had more chlorophyll than you would hope for and less light penetration that you would expect. And so it's really just like that combination of things. And it honestly is the most vulnerable bay segment to getting it from both sides, right? Because it's sort of right there at the interface between the Gulf and the upstream portions of the bay.
Got it. Thank you for that. Well, we spoke quite a bit at length about the Manatee River and some of the discharges there. One of our municipalities has been struggling with stormwater management for some time. So one of the strategies we used was taking some of the CDBGDR, disaster resiliency funds, and allocating about 30 million to help them with inflow and infiltration. So short, simplified explanation is they have a lot of clay water pipes that, well, let's say they're not really pipes anymore. They just disintegrate over time. So we've been helping that. One of their targets is to replace many of those and re-sleeve or rebuild those pipes so that we can reduce inflow and infiltration. And of course, the holding tanks, they're trying to spend money there as well.
And I think for this body, that's like a really valuable recommendation. Manatee County, Hillsborough County, Pinellas County, Pasco County, all got big opportunities and trying to come up with plans for how to spend it, investing in making wastewater infrastructure more resilient. Not just flood proofing with flood walls and things like that, but things like investing to reduce inflow and infiltration. Or I would even argue for those wastewater treatment plants that are not currently operating at advanced wastewater treatment levels, now is a really good time to use those money to do that, because we know that a cleaner bay with less nitrogen and less algae is more resilient to these kind of extreme events too. So if you're a wastewater utility and you're not at AWT standards, now's the time to start to get up there.
So
Thank you, ma'am. Would you say your name and please?
Natasha DeCrell. Do you see enough quantitation of nitrogen reduction in the activities we're doing, maybe on a project management prioritization level? Absolutely. And how do you see us facilitating? And I'm thinking of this with the habitat management plan, where you can kind of quantify, because that might be a missing piece as far as communicating more simply when we're deciding what types of projects to do, where to do them, and if it's going to have an impact. I think what we're getting at is we're not necessarily considering nitrogen reduction because of other priorities, and maybe that's something we need to focus on.
Yeah, so we do report on those actions. So many of the partners report on nitrogen load reduction projects in the action plan database, and then we summarize that in a table every 5 years that we provide to the Department of Environmental Protection and the US EPA, so that we can report on progress for the amount of nitrogen that's been precluded from entering the system. And what we've seen over recent years is a steep drop off in the number of projects and the amount of money and the number of pounds of nitrogen that are being precluded from the bay. So I think for a long time, we were sort of set it and forget it. Things are looking great in Tampa Bay. Let's all, give ourselves like a pat on the shoulder. And we maybe weren't as diligent with either doing those projects or reporting on those projects. And it's now the bay's kind of starting to show, and we're not able to tell that story as much. So I definitely think there's a need, especially with this amount of growth that we've seen as a region. It's really cool that I get to go out in the public and say, hey, we've got 3 million people, more than 3 million people living in the watershed today. And we've got about a third of the nitrogen that we did back in the 1970s, where the population was only 1 million. So we've been able to grow the economy and grow the population and reduce nitrogen loads. If we don't keep offsetting and doing nitrogen load production projects, I won't be able to go out and tell that story to the community, and we'll see and pay for it in downstream water quality. So I really think that's an important piece of it. And if you look back over the past 10 years or so, honestly, the biggest nitrogen load reduction projects that we've seen are from alternative water supplies that are tapping our surface water rivers. So by diverting rivers discharge, which we know that river and freshwater delivery to the estuary is really important, but those diversions for public water supply represent the most significant nitrogen load reduction projects we have, like drinking water from the Alafaya River. Like that shows the biggest nitrogen load offset to the region, to the bay. And I was really surprised when I really dug deep into the data and looked at that. It makes sense, but it was surprising to me that we don't have anything that really even comes close. Which is why I think Lake Tarpon represents such an opportunity, because the people got to drink. And right now it's a challenge, but that means it can be an opportunity if we think about it right.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Kevin, did you have your hand up? No? Anybody else? Commissioner?
One very brief one. So Tampa Mayor Pastor announced about the results of a lot of our municipalities have spent quite a bit of money after the 2024 season clearing out our stormwater systems. Tampa removed about 500 tons of debris and other materials from their systems. I'm still waiting on an accounting from mine. But one of the questions I have is, would you expect, because of the improved flow into the lower Tampa Bay, throughout Tampa Bay, that we might see increased nutrients this season because of the clearing of all those canals and drains?
Really appreciate that you asked this question, because if you want to know what keeps me up at night and weighs heavy on my heart, it's this very question. I understand, and I live on one of these kind of like creek ditch systems that is moving stormwater. But when you just dredge them out, straighten them out, you're moving water really quickly. It's not having time to have sediments, suspended solids settle out. It's not having time for the water and the nutrients to interact with plants to uptake those nutrients before it's delivered to a downstream water body. So I'm very concerned that our response to 2024 hurricane season is going to look like our response in the 1960s to Hurricane Donna, where we're going to ditch and drain the entire watershed, and we're going to pay for it in downstream water quality. I think there are consultants in this room who do really excellent work on natural channel design, where we can provide flood protection benefits that are also treating for stormwater, water quality, and providing habitat benefits, and also serving as community assets in terms of beautifying like what's in people's yards and what's in their neighborhoods. And I really hope we think differently about like the slow water movement and the kinds of benefits they can provide. None of that's to say that I don't think flooding is important, because I absolutely think it is. I just think our knee-jerk reaction to just to dredge it all out and straighten it out is not a one that's going to serve the other values that we have as a community long term. And I know that these are really wicked and tough challenges to grapple with and to solve as a region, as an individual community, or as an individual city. But I will say that the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, like, I'm happy to serve as a neutral facilitator as different local governments are working through these problems, and to talk about tidal creeks and the multiple kinds of benefits that it can provide, and how we can do better for these systems going forward, because I'm absolutely concerned that if we just dig them out, we're going to see downstream water quality suffer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to make a comment on?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Hey, thanks, Barbara. Yeah, Chris Anastasia Swiftmud. I just kind of want to foot stomp on something that Maya said, and just add something to that. So the idea of nitrogen reduction, I mean, that is something that we know is effective, and it's something we can control. Those of us in this room have the ability to affect the policy that can further reduce nitrogen. So any nitrogen reduction is good, in my opinion. But I also want to just circle back to something that Maya said, that, you know, we've been talking about nitrogen reduction since, I don't know, the 80s, right? So that's what formed the Tampa Estuary Program. The National Estuary Program's primary role is to enact and support the Clean Water Act. I mean, that's kind of what you guys do. And so we know this for a long time, but one of the things I just want to also point out is that what the Bay was in the 1990s is not what it is today. The environment has changed significantly. We've got up to a foot more sea level. temperatures are far warmer now than they were 30, 40 years ago. And so, you know, we, again, from a management standpoint, nitrogen reduction is gonna get you the best return on your investment. But we need to think about this not in the context of what the bay looked like in the nineties. We're seeing changes. I'll talk a little bit about that, I think, in my next presentation, but, you know, we have to keep that in mind, that some of these numbers, you know, it may very well be, we need more nitrogen reduction than we thought we needed in the nineties because the environment has changed. One example of that is, you know, we've seen temperatures not necessarily getting hotter, but getting less cold. The bay doesn't get as cold as it did 30, 40 years ago. So we think what that's done is that has kind of put the competitive advantage on macroalgae. And we're seeing increases in macroalgae, not only here, but globally, all over the world. And so I think that's something that we need to think about is, you know, I think the paradigm works. And you know, kudos to the ESRI program. We're wrapping up in a similar capacity study that the Old Tampa Bay Working Group, Nitrogen Management Consortium has been doing. The district's helping fund that. And, you know, we're taking a hard look at these numbers and saying, are these the right numbers that we need in a different world that we're living in today? And likely we will be living in 20 or 30 years. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. But yeah, nitrogen reduction, that's the one thing we can affect. And we do a good job of it, I think, when we do it.
Yeah, that's an excellent observation. And Maya, even when you leave here, if it comes to mind, Alana's been taking frantic notes of all of your recommendations. But ultimately, this group is gonna wanna know, you know, what will they probably individually know? This is such a brilliant group, and I'm not saying that facetiously, I really mean it. With all the great backgrounds that the people in this room and online have, we can get all these facts together and make these substantial recommendations. What you just said, Chris, is very substantial because time has changed so much, but think about these. And if you want to come back with your summation, what's happened, share them with Alana. We can go through them. And if there's anything that this organization can do to help Manatee or Pinellas or Pasco or Hillsborough, we'll have some substance. Because I don't like just to hear the bad tales. I want to know what action.
District program, so I can tell the good stories. I got a bait and switch.
Anything, Evan?
Thanks for bringing up natural channel design. The benefits of that are immense for nitrogen removal, even flood reduction. Thanks for that. And to bring to Chris's point, our targets for salt marsh. Does that include all salt marsh, Spartina in the water, all the way up to the uplands?
Yeah.
We're getting pinched there.
Yeah.
As sea level rises, we can't affect.
At
our level
Anyway,
We have limited effects, but we can affect.
And with the, as Chris pointed out, we're not getting those decadal freezes that are pulling back our mangroves. Is the target for marshes appropriate? Chasing something we can't meet?
So I think that the new Habitat Master Plan really did evaluate that. And so I think that the target that we have adopted now is one that is still achievable. And I still think that there is value for planting and restoring salt marshes, whether it's high marsh, low marsh, whatever, even if we know that in 5 years or so, they're going to convert to mangroves because it's like merging in traffic, right? You want as much available lane space for marshes as you can. They are a niche habitat for a lot of different fish and bird species. They're important. We might come to a 5 or 10 year update of the Habitat Master Plan when we look at the data and say, there's just not enough restoration opportunity space for marshes at this acreage amount anymore. And I think that we have set up now a paradigm that is both achievable and aggressive. So I think we've got like a system set up where it's going that we would be able to, you know, adjust that target in real time if it no longer looks possible. But for now, I do kind of support the targets that are existing that were developed in 2020.
Okay, anybody else? Say your name, please. And
Peter Clark, Tampa Bay Watch. Chris, really appreciate your comments. Thanks for bringing climate change back into the discussion. You know, walking around Tampa Bay, time has changed that much since the 1990s. I thought I was just getting shorter. Maya, it's a great presentation. Doing this once a year really helps identify the issues that has to stay up on the front. How sensitive is your model to red tide impacts?
Which,
Water quality model?
oh, so that's not a model, though. That's just actual data that's collected. And so that's cells that are in the water column. So it's sensitive. I think it's an accurate representation of red tide. The limitations of the monitoring design program is that it's once a month samples at fixed stations. So if you have a very patchy bloom, or if you happen to go out and collect your sample at a time where the red tide is not blooming as much, then it's going to give you a different chlorophyll value than if you were like right on it or chasing the bloom kind of
So when we do have blooms in the bay, does it show up in the water quality model?
It does show up in the water quality monitoring programs, but I will say one of the things that we do right now is we compare, we don't report it, we haven't formalized it like as an indicator, but we know that sometimes we'll experience either a red tide bloom, or we focus a lot on pyridinium up in Old Tampa Bay, and we'll see the monthly water quality sampling, you know, show one thing, but we know that there has been a bloom going on, so we will compare those to some of the other data that are available that Pinellas County is collecting through their random sampling program, or that FWC is collecting through their harmful algal bloom monitoring program. And we'll kind of look, and so a lot of times what we do is we'll show that like, hey, there was a pyridinium bloom this year, even though the monthly sampling, the routine sampling that gives us that really long data set to compare against didn't really capture the peak or didn't capture what was going on. So sometimes they don't match up perfectly, but you know, if the bloom's going on while the guys are taking the sample, it's good. Those are the caveats.
great. Peter, it's good to see you, by the way.
What's that?
It's good to see you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yes.
Barbara, yeah, Chris Anastasia, Swiftmud. Hey, I got a quick question, Maya. So the Nectin you showed tracks very closely to that figure, the seagrass figure, and you didn't mention the codependence of fisheries and seagrass. I'm wondering, like, you know, we see that increasing trend until about 2016, and then that decline. They're trending together. Is that because of that codependence, do you think, between seagrass and fisheries?
Because I think we kind of take that as the baseline, and I feel like I did say it, but I probably glossed over it, because that's sort of like the connection. Seagrass rolls into the fish that are relying on it for habitat. What we find though is that the sensitivity to this index is more related to perturbations like red tide or frost freeze events. So like you'll see like a big snook die off if there's a cold snap or something like that. But mostly we had a really wet period starting like in the middle part of the teens decade. And you know, we had a big red tide event then in 2017, 18, 19. We had another really big red tide event in 2021. So it's definitely tracking with think of the baseline condition at that spot.
So it's not necessarily causality, but
No.
definitely code.
Yeah, I don't think that we could say that it's the causal at all, but if you want to know sort of how we see the relationships, those are there.
Well, I hope you will be prepared to update us.
Always.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate your presentation. And Chris, that means you, Dr. Anastasia, with the Southwest Florida Water Management District. I understand you're going to present the results of the district's 2024 seagrass mapping. That's both the Springs Coast and Suncoast region, right?
Right. Everybody, thank you.
gonna take kind of a more regional, perspective here on seagrass. So we've been talking a lot about Tampa Bay. So I'm gonna kind of throw the C back into ABCM. Because we're gonna talk about the district-wide, mapping project that we did, that completed 2024. We are still finishing up some of the metadata for it, so it's not available online yet, but it should be by the end of this week. Maya, we've got, Marcus is getting a link to that today. Should be in here in a moment. So what I want to do is, kind of talk to you guys about, not only the results of the map, but also the, kind of how we do it. So we're going to cover a few topics.
Use the clicker.
He's trying to get you to,
Yeah, there is a clicker pointed at Megan's
There
computer.
we go. All right. So, if I walk around, can you guys hear me okay? Can they hear me online all right? If I
no,
do
the
that?
problem is it's gotta record, doesn't it?
It will, wherever he is in the room, it's fine.
So we're good.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
cool. Because I like to point. Those of you online, sorry, might not see me pointing, but so there's 4 things that I'm going to do today. I'll talk a little bit about why we map seagrass, why that's important, and really more specifically, why the district is doing it. Like, why are we mapping seagrass? Kind of give you a little bit of a history on that. Talk a little bit about the mapping process, and then we'll delve into the results. First, starting from the Springs Coast and then working our way south, Suncoast region. Those of you who attended the governing board meeting last month, this may be very familiar to you because it's basically the same presentation, but I am now free to give you a lot more information on it than I did at the governing board meeting. All right, so why are seagrasses important? I don't think I need to sell that concept to you guys. I think everyone recognizes that. Maya talked a lot about why we hear about seagrass, and so I think we can kind of go through this pretty quickly. But the one bullet I did want to highlight is the last one, which is sensitivity to water quality change. And the reason why that's important is because that's a large part of why we in the district are the ones that do the aerial mapping of seagrass. And this started way back in the 1980s in Tampa Bay. So Tampa Bay really was the beginning of the district seagrass mapping program. Tom Reese was the one that kind of started that whole process together with the estuary program that was newly created. And so it was really in response to this observed loss that folks like Roger Johansson, Walt Avery, back in the Bay Study Group days, were really noticing in the 1980s. And so this was a big concern. And we recognized, like in the last slide, that seagrasses are sort of, kind of like the canary in the coal mine. It's a canary of the estuary. And so as seagrasses decline, typically so goes your estuary. So this decided that it would start mapping seagrass, actually started in the early 1980s. And this was kind of grew over time, not only from a technological standpoint, but just also from a usability standpoint. And over the years, these maps have really become very important to the resource management community at large. I kind of liken these maps to when you hear the economic reports coming out, from the companies, or when the Fed releases its jobs numbers. Everybody's on the edge of their seat. Very similar here. Like, we want to know how we're doing. And while we do recognize, and we just had a great discussion about things like rainfall and bigger issues that are affecting the quality of the estuary, we do know that our actions also have a direct impact. So it's a way to track, are we doing well? Are we not doing so well? And so that's basically why, the district is interested, and why we continue to fund this work and kind of lead the charge from a landscape scale. Couldn't do it without our partners, though. So that's very important. I'll probably hit that a few times, that this is a peer review process. We collaborate with the estuary programs, local governments, state, federal agencies, and that helps us ultimately create a better product. It is one of the longest running aerial seagrass mapping programs. I think St. John started in the early 80s. Chesapeake has been doing it since, I think, the mid 70s. And our mapping program is based on the work that was started in the Chesapeake Bay and continues to this day. So what does our program look like? We basically have two regions. So we're going to talk about what we call the Springs Coast, or some of you may know it as the Nature Coast. It's basically the southern portion of Florida's Big Bend region. And it goes from about Cedar Key of Bay, just to the east of Cedar Key, which is Wackasassa Bay, south to just above Anclo Key off Pasco County. And then the Suncoast region, which starts in Clearwater Harbor, St. Joseph Sound, includes Tampa Bay, and then goes south to Charlotte Harbor. So these are kind of the two regions that we map. In the Suncoast region, which is Tampa Bay South, we're on a 2-year cycle. This is the area that we really started in earnest in the late 80s. 1988 was the first year that we mapped that entire region. We did that on a 2-year cycle. The Springs Coast region, we picked that area up in 2007. The reason why the district is interested in that region is because, as you all probably know, we've seen over the years a significant increase in nitrate concentrations in many of our springs that go into our spring-fed rivers, Mattapan, Arlington, and Gulf. And so we were very concerned about what that might mean to these bluegrass areas. And so we added that part of the map program in 2007. But we do that on a 4-year cycle. And our methodology, which I'll talk about here in a second, is pretty consistent with the other water management districts that map seagrass in our state. St. Johns River has been mapping, as I said, since about like the early 80s, the Internal Lagoon. And then South Florida covers the lower portion of Charlotte Harbor, which is outside our district, which covers Caloosahatchee, Estero Bay. And they don't do it as frequently. They're kind of on like a 5 to 7 year cycle. So what I'm going to do now is kind of segue into the process, and I'm going to keep it pretty high level, but in order to produce a seagrass map, there's really 3 stages, and they don't happen in series. They kind of happen kind of at the same time. The first, obviously, first and foremost is image acquisition. You got to collect the imagery by which then we photo interpret to create the map. And the third one here is very important as well, and that's the field verification. You're only as good as the data you collect. So we do a lot of field verification to make sure that these maps are as accurate as they can be. We also incorporate a lot of other data, the Transect data that's led by the Tampa Bay Estuary Program that many of us in this room participate in. There's a lot of other data Sarasota County collects. We get data from the Charlotte Harbor Aquatic Reserves, the Nature Coast Aquatic Reserves. So there's a lot of in-water data that is very useful in helping us to create a better map. But the first piece of this whole process is image acquisition. And this is going to be really important because our flight window is December to February. That's really important because when I show you the 2024 results, we're talking pre-2024 hurricane season. So it's really December 23. Unfortunately, our flight window was extended thanks to our El Nino winter that we've had last 2 winters ago. So 23, 24. Typically, we try to close the window by February, but we actually ended up going into March, April. So it was a little bit long window to get that imagery because the conditions were not right. We do have very strict go, no-go criteria for flight. So we have to have right sun angle. We have to have right tide conditions. We have to have right clarity. We have to have the right sky conditions, right wind conditions. So imagine all that stuff lining up and then crossing your fingers that the plane's not broken, because that happened more than once. A lot of things have to align. So we have actually daily calls first thing in the morning around 7 a.m. when the flight windows open with the flight crew. We go through the forecast, we look at the conditions, and then ultimately we give the thumbs up or thumbs down for them to go for flight. So there's a lot that goes into it. It's a very stressful time for us, but ultimately we do collect the imagery in that time period. And we do that for a couple of reasons. It's not ideal from an ecological standpoint because, you know, this is the growing season right now. And so if you want to know the maximum extent of seagrass, you don't want to collect it in the wintertime when things go dormant. Although they're becoming less dormant now as the temperatures continue to rise. But the reason why we do it at this time of the year is because typically the atmosphere is clearer, the conditions are better. Wasn't really the case this time, but on average, it's better. And the other reason that's even more important than that is consistency. So part of the goal of these maps is not just to give you an acreage total for any given but to look at the trend over time. That's really where these maps are very useful. And to do that, we need to be consistent year over year. So that's another reason why we do it at this time of the year. So once all the images are collected, and we obviously do this using a high resolution digital camera. This is an example of of one of those types of cameras that we would use. And then there's a lot of post-processing that goes into the imagery. So the imagery isn't just, you know, you go up in a plane and you take a picture and you're done. There has to be a lot of georectification, orthorectification, there's color balancing, pixel stretching, all sorts of stuff that happens after the fact. And also, you know, the aircraft, that picture on the top right is actually one of the aircraft that was used. So you can see the little hole in the bottom of the hull. That's where the actual camera sits in the aircraft. So these are specially designed aircraft for taking aerial imagery. And because we're taking imagery that is under the water surface, there is a lot of post-processing that goes into it. So a lot of people ask, like, why does it take so long to come up with these numbers? A lot of it has to do with the fact that when we're doing the post-processing, it takes several months before we finally can take those images, stitch them together, create a mosaic, and then pass them on to the photo interpreter so that they can start doing their photo interpretation. So I talked a little bit about field verification because it's very important. We have ramped up our field verification significantly over the years. Just to give you an idea, we collected over 2,000 points for the 2024 maps. And we can do that because we take advantage of a lot of the technology that's out there. One technological advancement that we all know is GoPros, cameras, digital cameras that are very small and very good resolution. So what we do is we're able to go out and we collect digital imagery under the water with these GoPro cameras. The top right picture is an example of what we call a quad pod. Kevin, I think you might have been the one that designed this thing. I don't remember, but
The lower one was somebody.
the lower one, yeah, yeah. So Kevin Shelton's worked with us over the years on doing a lot of this field work. So I know you're very, very intimate with what goes on. But thanks to folks like Kevin, we've been able to really streamline the field data collection process. Back in the day, you had a clipboard and a pencil, you anchor to your site, you're frantically taking notes, and then you go to the next site. Then take all that back in the office and you're looking at it, you're trying to figure out what the heck it is. Your field sheet's wet now, pencils are smeared, and your penmanship is terrible. We can move away from that now, and we've gone to collecting video, which then gives us not only an actual depiction of what's there, but also allows other people to see it. And it gives us a library catalog of what was there. So when the future us, 20 years from now, go out and do this work, they've got videos that they can look at and see what we saw back in the past. So it's really been a great advancement for us. It's allowed us to collect a lot more points, and we do it while keeping costs pretty much the same. So that's been really helpful for us. The one type of field verification that is important to us above all the others is the accuracy assessment. So this is an independent accuracy assessment. We hire an independent contractor to go out and collect data at the same time that they're flying collective imagery. Then those data are archived until the draft maps are created, and then they run an accuracy assessment. If we reach 90% or greater, then we accept the map product, and it goes into final production. So ultimately, what we're talking about is photo interpretation, or PI. So photo interpreters, they are contracted. This map was completed by NV5. It's our contractor this year. And the photo interpreters, or the PIs, are the ones that actually create the maps. And we do this based on what's called a modified flux classification system, or land use, land cover classification system. And so these code numbers that you see on the top of the slide are modified flux codes. That's not really that important for you, but that is how we map. What is important is when I show you the results, understand that what we are mapping is a signature. So right here on the top left is an example of what a continuous signature looks like. What do we mean by continuous? Continuous, it means that signature, which we know is seagrass because the PIs are very good at what they do, and we also check it with field work, that signature shows a 25 to 100% cover of seagrass. So therefore, it would be mapped as a 9116 code. This is kind of the bottom left is an example of what it might look like in real space. The one in the middle is patchy or sparse. So we can use those terms interchangeably, and that's given a code of 9113. And that's basically if your percent covers less than 25%, or you have this patchy kind of mottled look, then you would be classified as a 9113. It does not, and this is another important thing to remember when we look at the results, it does not say anything about the quality or the species of grass. So you can have dense seagrass that looks really nice, like this picture, or it could look really crummy and covered in macroalgae. But if that signature still shows a dominant seagrass signature, it's going to be mapped as 9116. So that's where the transect data and other field data come into play. Because that's where you get the information on what species were there, what's the quality of that grass. And then the one I wanted to show you on the right is an attached algae code 9121, not a seagrass, doesn't count as part of the total acres of seagrass, but it's nonetheless very important. It may be hard to see, but if you compare the signature in the top right image with the one on the top left, you can see it's much darker. And it has kind of a, well, where's my 9121? Oh, it says 9116, it's supposed to be 9121, but it's a much darker signature. So you can actually tell the difference. And in places like Tampa Bay, when we're talking about attached algae, we're talking a lot more commonly about Chlorella proliferans, which is an example of that on the bottom right. One of the things, though, that is also important to keep in mind is we do not map drift algae. And we've talked about this, and we're continuing to talk about this for the next mapping cycle, which is actually the window starts in December for the 26 maps. Do we want to map macroalgae? Do we want to try to map macroalgae that is drift algae, not just attached? We're not sure yet, and that's a conversation that we can have another time. But just realize that even though there's seagrass, and you look at the numbers and you look at the maps and you can see seagrass, doesn't mean that's all that's there. You could have a lot of drift algae there, it's just not picked up by us. And then I wanted to also just talk about two more codes before we go into the results. And these are really more specific to the Springs Coast region. The Springs Coast seagrass area is more of a habitat mosaic, not just grass, but you can see things like corals, sponges, attached algae. There's a lot of stuff. It's a mosaic of habitat types. And because of that, we have to use a couple of different codes, although we use this one, the 9122 code in Tampa Bay. There's not much of it, but we do map it. But 9115 is specific to the Springs Coast. And the reason for that is because, as you can see in the picture on the left, while seagrass is the dominant signature, there's a lot of other stuff in there. So we want to account for that. And we do that by adding that composite colonized seagrass code. And then the composite colonized algae code, which is essentially the same thing without the seagrass. Think of it that way. All right, enough about the process. Well, let's talk about the results. So what I'll do is start with Springs Coast. And the way we've segmented the Springs Coast region is we've segmented them into these different segments. They're fairly arbitrary, as you can see, based on very straight lines. But we try to kind of look at them from the rivers that are flowing into the Springs Coast. Because again, the reason why the district is interested in this is because we want to see if we're seeing any impact from these increasing nitrates that we're seeing in the springs. So they're kind of focused around the mouths of the rivers, starting in Wackasasa Bay and then going all the way down to Anklet. We've also subdivided them into an offshore and an inshore component, at least some of them, the ones that are kind of in the middle, Crystal Bay down to Eric. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start out with the numbers for the inshore Springs Coast segments. So that starts up at Wackasasa Bay, and then we go down to Anklet inshore. And so one of the ways to interpret these top line numbers is we look at the last map of the last cycle. In this case, it was 2020, because we do these every 4 years. And then we look at the change. How has this changed from 2024 to 2020? And so that's what you see here on this table. There's a couple of ways to interpret this. If you go on the far right column of the table, you can look at it from a percent change standpoint. What's the percent change 24 relative to 2020? But then you can also look at it from an absolute acreage change. So how many acres have changed from one way or the other? And if you look at the table, there's a couple of things that stand out. One, there's a whole lot of 1%. So general rule of thumb, when you're looking at our change analysis, anything less than or around 1% is essentially no change. So it's kind of the noise of the map. Those of you who may be familiar with water quality data in the laboratory, minimum detection limit means anything below that minimum detection limit, I don't know what's there. That's basically 1% is our minimum detection limit. If you want to think of it as from a practical quantitative limit, 3% is roughly our PQL, if you will, which means any change that's less than 3%, you're getting close to the noise of the map. Anything less than 1% is essentially no change. So that's how you kind of interpret that. The other thing that should stand out is the fact that Waukesasa Bay has a pretty large negative number, 18% reduction for 2,200 acres compared to 2020. That sounds like a lot, and Tampa Bay, that would be a lot. But look at your total inshore for 2024 is 2,380 or 238,868 acres of sea habitat. Different, yes, orders of magnitude different. So a 2,000 acre loss still results in virtually no change when you look at it from the entire area. Now, that's still significant for Waukesasa Bay, and any of you who have been to Waukesasa Bay can probably explain, maybe why we're seeing such loss. Waukesasa Bay is very shallow. It's very turbid. There's a lot of silt because there are lots of salt marsh, mangrove habitats up there, and it's just a barren map. And there's lots of rocks. There's lots of oysters. Typically, you need to get in there with an airboat because it's very shallow. So it's not a friendly environment for seagrass. So seeing a loss like that could mean it was just especially turbulent over that period compared to what it was like in 2020. So it's something that's of concern, but it's not something that we think is a problem. Now in 2028, we see a reduction. Now we're starting to see. We don't think they're because in the 2016 numbers, very little change between 2016 and 2020. The other thing that stands out on this table is the anklet inshore, where we've seen about a 7% gain in grass, about 1,100. And top line, very little change. And that tracks when you look at this area all the way back to 2007 when we started mapping. This area is remarkably resilient, and we don't see major changes in seagrass acreage either way. Now, if we take a look at the offshore component, again, a couple things stand out. One, just like the last table, lots of ones on that far right column, which essentially means no change. You can see a change in the anklet offshore. So unlike the inshore segment where we saw gain, we saw loss in the offshore segment. Is that significant? Maybe, maybe not. Again, no major trend that we're seeing, and much of that loss, if you will, is simply a conversion from that consolidated seagrass, that 9115 I showed you, where we went from a seagrass signature that's more dominant to one that's less dominant. Does that mean there's no seagrass there? No. It just means that the dominant signature is all that other stuff. So we went from a 9115 to a 9122. So we interpret these a little bit differently than we will when we get to the seagrass. That is my bottom line. So if we combine the two, you'll see the grand total for this Spring Coast region for 2024 is over 580,000 acres of sea habitat. That's
the people in the back.
580,000
So much.
acres. It is one of the largest seagrass areas in the continent. It's actually second largest in the continental U.S., second only to Florida Bay. It's one of the largest seagrass areas. It's a lot of grass, and that's one of the main reasons why we're so concerned about it, because we don't want to lose that. That's an amazing habitat, and it's often unnoticed, which maybe isn't a bad thing.
Sorry to interrupt. When you're talking about offshore, I'm just curious, what is the depth of offshore? Like, I think of seagrass as being shallow, so I'm just curious about the depth.
So, yeah, so we cut it off around 7 to 10 foot, the
Okay.
isobath.
All right.
And that's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. And we can pause here for questions because I'm gonna go to Suncoast next. Very different presentation coming out. But yeah, that's a great question because like we were talking about with Maya's talk, you know, we're talking light attenuation down to about 6 feet. When you get out here, and this is about 25 miles offshore, you're at about 25 feet of water. And there's grass out there. In fact, we know that there's grass that grows all the way up to 75 miles offshore. There was work done back in the 1980s by the then Mineral Management Service. They did a really thorough investigation of seagrass habitat in the entire Big Bend region from Apalachicola to Tarpon Springs. And they found grass growing in 75 feet of water. Now, it's not much, mostly halophila, very, very little halophila, but I mean, the potential exists that you can have grass growing that deep in this area because the water is just so clear and it's so shallow going out. And I'm going to show you actually that I do have one more slide I want to show you because I want to show you the actual map. So this is what the map looks like. Don't worry about the different colors and the legend. Just remember 9121 and 9122 are algae and other stuff. The seagrass, the ones that add up to that 583,000 are the top 3 codes, 113, 9113, 9115, and 9116. So anywhere you see green on this map, that's seagrass habitat. So there's a lot of green. But I wanted to point this out because if you notice at the very end, it just kind of stops. That's not real. The grass keeps growing further offshore. The problem is once you get to about 25 or 30 feet, you can't see anything from the air. So these aircraft are flying at about 9,000 feet. And once you get to about 25 foot, just the natural attenuation of light in water makes it hard to see anything. So that's why we kind of cut it off there. But we know there's more grass. And we've been trying to work with NOAA to see if they would partner up with us to do a deeper look at the deepest areas, because some of these areas haven't been looked at in over 50 years. So we don't know what's out there. But yeah, that's kind of why there's that sort of artificial line at the deep edge, because you can't really see much more. But a couple of things just to point out here, you can see this Einclote offshore kind of goes, purple. And again, that just shows you that shift from that composite colonized habitat. You remember the picture of 9122 with all the sponges and the sea fans and all that. It just means that dominant signature is more of that than sea grass. So it went from, so it looks bad on the table, but it's really still good habitat. It's still there. It's just not seagrass. It's not the dominant signature there. The figure on the top left kind of just shows you the last 3 iterations of this map and just how stable it is. I did not go back to 2007 because the size of this area has changed. So in 2007, it was a much smaller area. And then in 2012, it expanded out a little bit more. But I'll tell you, the level of detail from 2016 on was phenomenal. You know, the PIs do a great job. You can see that level of detail in these maps and color.
You mentioned the increasing nitrate levels from springs, and I can speak for Pinellas that over the past probably 5 years, we've been seeing nitrogen. Also, echo what we were talking about earlier, we've seen increasing nitrogen concentrations, specifically in that region. Are you, based on 2024 data, can you have enough information to kind of speak to if increasing nitrogen levels are
Yeah, so that's a great question.
couldn't have asked it better myself. That is a really good question, and I think it ties in nicely to what we're gonna talk about when we get to the Suncoast estuaries. So there's a project, we've been working with the University of Florida since the late nineties. There's a project called Project Coast. There's about 120 fixed water quality monitors across this entire region. We don't see any noticeable trends in nutrients in the water column. But that doesn't mean it's not there. And that goes back to this conversation that many of us have had and are continuing to have about the importance of macroalgae, especially drift algae. In this region, you see a lot of sargassum, especially off of Crystal River, Crystal Bay. Lots of sargassum out there. Many of you may have heard about the blob, the one now that they're tracking, so just because we don't see that increase in the water doesn't mean it's not there. And that's a really hard thing to tease out because many of these springs are far inland. Like think about Rainbow Springs. Rainbow Springs has nitrate concentrations now pushing 3 milligrams. That's very high. But what's the likelihood that nitrogen molecule is going to make it all the way out into the Gulf? I don't know. But I do know that, we see nutrient cycling, you see nitrification, denitrification, a lot of things happening. And I think some of that, more and more, I'm becoming more convinced that expression is sometimes, maybe more often than not, expressed as macroalgae and not necessarily phytoplankton algae. Well, Tampa Bay probably there's exceptions, of course, but there's no doubt we're seeing an increase in drift algae. We're seeing it here too. It's just so hard to quantify. And you imagine in an area where essentially you're working in the open Gulf, how do you quantify that in a way that you then make some decisions? It's hard, but it doesn't mean we're not trying. I don't know if that answers your question.
A little bit.
Yeah, we're not the bottom line is from a water quality standpoint, we're not seeing any major trends offshore. And it could also be pollution.
You can look at Anglo because we are seeing need to know the follow-up. We are doing the study right now.
Well, you'll see St. Joe Sound here in a second. That's coming up. I'm sorry, Mike, did you have okay.
Yes.
I just have one question. So you have 4-year gaps here. The other coasts further south of us, you do 2-year. Is there a point where you're going to go 2 years up there, up on our springs? Just because when is it too late if there's something going on? How are we going to be able to react because we can't react fast enough? So it concerns me that you've got a 2-year south of us and we got 4.
Well, if someone would like to fund us to do that.
It is. So part of the reason why we do 4 is bottom line, it's expensive.
Money.
And it's expensive to fund. But the other reason too is because we don't see any evidence of change. What I would propose is instead of trying to map the entire region on a 2-year cycle, maybe we look at certain areas, and I'm thinking mostly nearer to the coast, because any impact from anthropogenic impact is going to be felt near shore first before it gets to the offshore. But maybe we do the offshore every 4 years and look at partnering with folks to do maybe the near shore area on a 2-year cycle. I wouldn't be against having that conversation, but I don't think we do not have plans to do that. But that's certainly something to talk about. You guys keep asking, Ed keeps asking, how come we don't do it every year? Because it takes a year to make these things.
My question, so this is
First,
my,
a long
I-
time.
the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, and actually the question I was gonna ask was I was anticipating that Colleen was gonna say something. And so there's the aerial mapping component, and I just can't imagine what the field verification side of things is. And what a on the ground monitoring program to complement the aerial mapping would look like, because the depth, the length of the transects, the scope of all of that. So I was gonna kind of ask about what the ground truthing looks like, because I just can't imagine which entity could possibly have capacity or how you would design the monitoring program that would be appropriate to provide you that kind of complementary interval kind of data.
So it's interesting you mentioned that because University of Florida does have a seagrass monitoring network here. They've just started that, I think, about a year or two ago. So I don't know if everybody knows this region is now part of the Nature Coast Aquatic Reserve. It's the first aquatic reserve in the states. The first new one since I think like what 30, 40 years, something like that. And so the Nature Coast Aquatic Reserve has been working with the University of Florida to do seagrass monitoring. So they are doing that monitoring. I believe it's a fixed station design, and it's based on the Project Coast data points.
Alana, that would be a good presentation.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would love to hear about it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that would be, yeah, I think that'd be valuable for everybody to hear. So yeah, we do have that, and you're right, logistically, anybody who's ever worked offshore knows. It's a lot easier to say it than do it, right? It's a pain to get out there and then, come back. So, and you're dealing with depths that are much deeper than like in Tampa Bay. A lot of our focal points are easy to get to, and then you just, instead of using one of those quad pod pictures, you just basically take a GoPro, put it on a stick, and you just go like that. So you're there maybe a minute, and then you're off to the next site. You go offshore, it takes you 2 hours to get there, and then you're in 30 feet of water. And, maybe you've got 2-foot seas. It's a different animal when you're working offshore, as many of you know. I know Mark knows all about that. Roger, you know.
Scars to show for it.
Are there other questions you all would like to ask?
Occasional studies up there also.
Paul Carlson's done a lot of work in the Swanee portion,
Yeah,
not as much, some
yeah.
in this
I
region.
helped him a couple of times up
Yeah,
there, and
yeah.
we went all the way from Anfield all the way to Crystal Road.
And I'm working, Brad Furman and I are talking about this area too, because in case you all don't know, Brad Furman runs the SIM program at FWRI, Seagrass Integrated Mapping Monitoring Program, which just got resurrected about maybe two years ago. So it had been, it had been kind of disbanded for many years, and then the state just restarted that. So Brad took over for Penny Hall and Paul Carlson, and he now has a staff that is looking at statewide monitoring and mapping of seagrass. So we're hoping to partner up with them too, to maybe get some more data. Did I do something wrong? Is there anybody online that has any questions? I'm not. No. All right. All right. Anything else for Springs Coast? Anyway, it's an amazing area. If you've not spent any time in this part of the world, it's gorgeous.
So beautiful. 172,000 acres off my coastline. That's like mind-boggling to think about, but I just want to see it watched closely.
I agree. All right, so now we're going to move on to Suncoast. So we were just talking about hundreds of thousands of acres of seagrass. Now we're going to talk about tens of thousands, which is still a lot, and it's still very important. And in fact, it's probably more critical here because it's so intensely urbanized. There are areas in Springs Coast, like off Pasco County, that are becoming more and more urbanized. But in general, this is the area that has had the biggest issues with seagrass habitat, urbanization, that nature. So we have 5 segments, if you will, within that make up this Suncoast region. And what I'll do, just like I did for Springs Coast, we'll start with Clearwater Harbor, St. Joe Sound, Tampa Bay, and then work our way south to Charlotte Harbor, even though I know that's kind of outside of your guys' purview. It'll be good to see that for regional context. All right, so similar table. Now we're talking 22 compared to 24. Again, remember, pre-24 hurricanes. And we'll look at the table the same way. If we go over to the right, this is the percent change
across those 2 years. And probably a couple of things stand out right off the bat. Number one is, unlike if I were to show you the 2020 to 2022 table, there's a lot more positive pluses on that column, which we were very encouraged to see. St. Joseph Sound, Clearwater Harbor, essentially no change compared to 2022. And we'll go into each of these here specifically in a minute. Tampa Bay, we saw modest gains, about 1,400 acres. First time we've seen gains since 2018, no, 2016. It's been a while. So seeing a plus number in Tampa Bay, great news. Sarasota Bay is the one that kind of took home the trophy this time around with a 19% gain, about 1,900 acres. Lemon Bay, yeah, essentially no change. And then unfortunately, Charlotte Harbor to our south saw a loss of about 890, almost 900 acres. And we'll go through each of these individually. So let's start with St. Joseph Sound and Clearwater Harbor. So each of these slides will have basically 3 elements. The table on the top left is showing you the change across each of the segments within a given estuary. And then the table on the bottom left shows you the time series since we started collecting. Now, Clearwater Harbor St. Joseph Sound started in 1999. So it doesn't go all the way back to 88, whereas the subsequent slides will. But one thing you see in the map on the right, again, you've only got really 2 seagrass codes here as opposed to the Springs codes where we had that 9115. Here we've only got the sparse or patchy and then the continuous or dense grasses. So dark green is dense, light green is sparse. See a lot of grass in St. Joseph Sound. Not much change over the last 2 cycles, but still doing very well. And then Clearwater Harbor North, we saw a gain. In Clearwater Harbor South, we saw a gain. Now, of course, 18 acres for Clearwater Harbor South. I mean, we were just talking about 580,000 acres, but a 3% gain, we'll take it. You know, we'll definitely take it. The thing that is very important to take away from the bottom left figure, though, if you notice, is 2024, we hit a record, a little over 18,000 acres of seagrass mapped in this estuary. So things are doing quite well. And with the caveat, this says nothing about the amount of drift algae that's out there. You can have very lush seagrass beds and have them carpeted with macroalgae. So just remember that. We're not talking, this isn't a binary map. It's not, it's there. If it's there, it's everywhere. If it's not, it's nowhere. That's not quite how this works. But the fact is that we do have a lot of seagrass habitat, and that's good news. This area does behave very similar to the Springs Coast, so it's not surprising to see that we haven't seen much change, at least since 2008. It's been pretty consistent. Yes.
John Alving, Friends of the River. You defined, I have a question about the size of certain areas, because you say some areas are less than 25%, which is patchy. Some are more than 25% continuous. Is each area over which you measured the same size, or how do you differ that?
So the polygons themselves that make up these maps are based on the signature itself. So 25% cover over any given area. So if you have a continuous bed, they're going to map that continuous bed until it stops being continuous. So you may have a polygon that's big or small. They're all different sizes and shapes. But I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing I do want to mention is we have I didn't mention it during the mapping process piece, but we have kind of a general rule of thumb. It's called a minimum mapping unit. And what that is it's basically how far can I zoom in before it's, I don't know that this is accurate. Our minimum mapping unit is about a 1/4 acre, but we take it on the more conservative side and we say 1 acre. So if you zoom into any of these layers less than an acre, you're in kind of the noise. And the reason we say that is because we've had folks try to, pinpoint the edge of a dock and say, wait, there's not grass there, and your map says there's grass. You're right, but it's too much. So just as a general rule, 1/4 acre is really our minimum mapping unit, and that's more from a spatial standpoint. The 25%, 100% is the percent cover of a
given signature when a PI is looking at it.
Thank you.
All right, any questions on St. Joseph Sound, Clearwater Harbor before we move over to Tampa Bay? All right, so let's go to Tampa Bay. Or, yeah, Tampa Bay. So these segments are very similar. They're basically the same segmentation that the ESRO program uses. I talked about them, they're the same. So when we talk about Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, and Old Tampa Bay, and then so forth and so on. Same general format. If we look at the table on the top left, the percent change, again, is mostly positive. As Maya pointed out, Old Tampa Bay continues to be our problem child, which, it's not a surprise. And when we're doing these maps, by the way, we do collaborate with our partners. We actually met with the ESRO program during the draft process to make sure that what we're seeing in the maps jives with what they're seeing in the field. And so, we have confidence that these trends are representative of what they're seeing in the field. Another thing to point out here that should catch your mind is Hillsborough Bay. So 189% gain. That's not a typo. 773 acres is a lot of seagrass to gain in Hillsborough Bay. Hillsborough Bay since between 2016 and 2022 lost about 80% of the grass in that area, partly due to red tide, partly due to Plenty Point, partly due to the fact that it's Hillsborough Bay. You notice on the far east shore, you see a lot of light green there. That's where the gain really happened. We gained a lot of the grass that we lost over the last several years back in that area. Now it's light green. What does light green mean? It's sparse, it's patched. It's mostly Haladuli. There's some halafel out there too. When you see the light green, it tends to imply it's a little bit more ephemeral than the dark green. So like in Boca Ciega Bay, you see a lot of dark green, a lot of that continuous grass. That's Thalassia, interspersed with some Syringodium, Haladuli, very, very well-established, thick beds of grass. Hillsborough Bay, it's not surprising. It is a boom and bust type of bay set. It will come in, it will do well for a while, and then something will happen. So we're going to celebrate the fact that we've got 773 more acres of grass in Hillsborough Bay. That has definitely helped the top line number, that 5% gain bay-wide. But we'll see if it's there in 2026. A couple of other things I just want to point out here. I'm going to change this now and show you the changed map. So I didn't do this for every bay segment because we won't be here all afternoon. But I did want to show you for Tampa Bay. This is another product that we have that you can download, which is the change analysis. And so this is basically, again, looking at 22 to 24, but now you can see where those changes are happening spatially. And again, Hillsborough Bay, that green is where the gains have happened. We also saw some pretty significant gains in lower Tampa Bay, just below the Skyway, the southwest of the Skyway Bridge. And also some gains scattered about as well. Most of the red, your eye's going to go up to Old Tampa Bay, you're surprised, but it's not all bad news even in Old Tampa Bay. If you look at the top, the northeast corner of Tampa Bay, I don't know if I have a little laser pointer. Yeah. Right here, this is the east side of the Courtney Campbell Causeway. DOT made a cut in the causeway here a few years back. And so this area here, we've actually seen fairly significant gain this cycle. It's the first time in a few cycles that we've actually seen seagrass expanding in that area, but we're very happy to see that. There's some grass that's coming in there. The other thing too I want to show you in Old Tampa Bay, this is the hump in Feather Sound. I think, Roger, you may have been the one to coin the term the hump, but if you go out to the edge of the hump, the end of it, you'll see a little bit of light green there as well. So, Maya, there are some signs of some growth of grass in Old Tampa Bay. It's hard to find, but it's there. It's just so sparse we can't see it from the air. And so we're encouraged by that, and we'll see what happens in 2026. But
there are some signs that the news isn't all bad in Old Tampa Bay. It's mostly bad, but it's not all bad. So that's
But
good.
it's, all hope is not lost.
Right, exactly. There is hope for Old Tampa Bay. I'll tell you, we saw in between 2018 and 2020, we saw about 1,500 acres of grass disappear, and it was replaced almost acre for acre with caulerpa, attached algae. And then in 22, we saw a lot of that algae disappear. And so it went from seagrass to attached algae to sand. And now we're starting to see maybe some whispers that the grass are trying to come back. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to be too speculative, but yeah, you can see the figure on the bottom left tells the story. We saw the record highs back in 2016, and then we just saw back to back to back losses. So 24 represents the first time we've seen a gain in many years. So we're very excited about that. A couple of other things to take away. Lower Tampa Bay, I don't have the figure because just for time's sake, Lower Tampa Bay also broke a record. More seagrass in Lower Tampa Bay than any other time since we started mapping in '88. Boca Ciega Bay was maybe about, I think, 800 acres shy of its all-time record. So both very similar to what Maya showed on the Transect data. Both of these bay segments are trending in the upward direction, and we really encourage to see that. But again, doesn't mean there's not a lot of macroalgae out there, because if you've been in Boca Ciega Bay, there's a ton of drift algae out there. So it's good news, but doesn't mean we're done. We can turn the lights off and go home. A lot more. All right, we'll go down to Sarasota Bay now. So Sarasota Bay, Ryan, big winner. Yes, think about 19% gain bay-wide. So when we say Sarasota Bay, we're not just talking about Sarasota Bay proper. We're talking about Palmasola Bay, Roberts Bay, Little Sarasota Bay, makes up the whole Sarasota Bay estuary, if you will. So overall, 90% gain. Most of that gain occurred in Sarasota Bay proper. And most of the gain in Sarasota Bay proper occurred in this area near what's called Lombard Point. And this was actually the epicenter of where most of the grass was lost in 2018 and 2020. Similar to Tampa Bay, things were looking really good in 2016 and then started to change in 2018. And then the bottom really dropped out in 2020. This was largely due to the red tide event of 2017 all the way to like January of 2019. And so really what one could surmise from this is that, it took this long to start to recover. But the good news with Sarasota Bay is the recovery, or what we saw here, was rapid. Very similar to kind of what we might be seeing in Old Tampa Bay. We went out in 22. We were doing a lot of our survey work. You could see grass was trying to come back, but we knew it was going to be too sparse for us to see from the air. And therefore, in 2022, we saw kind of disappointing numbers, slight reduction compared to 2020, but we were hopeful. And boy, did they come back. They came back with the vengeance up here in the part of Sarasota Bay. Malasia, Paladuli, I don't remember if there's Serengodium, I think was out there too a little bit, but really came back rapidly. And it's important to know, nobody planted any of this. It came in all on its own. So that's a very important point. And it's one that kind of has us a little bit scratching our heads a little bit, because the rapidity at which the grass came back is a little odd in terms of how did it do that. Now, Brad Furman did go out back in 22 and took some cores to see if there were any viable seeds, any viable below ground tissue. And he didn't find any. Now, it wasn't a thorough survey, so maybe he just missed it. But we don't think that the seed bank in this sediment was enough to explain this rapid increase in seagrass. So something else is going on. I'm not sure what that is, but we're actively trying to figure that out, because that was one of the most impressive gains. By the way, we were seeing the same thing. My counterpart, Lauren Hall, at St. John's, I was talking to her, and they're seeing a similar phenomenon in mosquito. A lot more seagrass. St. John's is actually met. They just got finished collecting their. So we'll be very interested to see what's going on the East Coast. All right, let's go to Lemon Bay. So Not a whole lot to report on Lemon Bay. Lemon Bay is kind of a little bit of an oddball in that it's a linear system with really not much opening to the Gulf. In some ways, it's kind of similar to Indian River Lagoon in terms of its geomorphology and how it functions. Similar trends. Again, a lot of this decline was due in part to that red tide event back in 2018. But things have kind of trailed off. They've kind of stabilized. Not much change between 22 and 24. So while that's good news in the sense that we're not seeing reduction, you know, we're still really kind of at record lows, not by much, but we're about where we were in 1988. So we're not seeing any sort of quote unquote recovery like we've seen in Sarasota Bay, but things are kind of holding the line. This is an area too where we do see a lot of drift algae, and the reason is again because it doesn't flush very well. So that drift algae starts growing, especially in the upper part of Lemon Bay, and it sticks around for a long time. The only other thing I wanted to point out here is this very tippy top portion. This is Donna and Roberts Bay. It's kind of a weird system because it doesn't belong to anyone. So we lumped it in with Lemon Bay, and recently, about 2 cycles ago, we started splitting it out and having reporting on it. Partly because the watershed has been severely altered. Back in the 1960s, they built Cowpen Slough, which took water from what used to drain into the Mayaca River and shunted it over into Donna and Roberts Bay and Lions Bay as well. So the watershed of Donna and Roberts Bay essentially increased like tenfold when they built Cowpen Slough. Now, Sarasota County has a project right now where they're treating that water, and ultimately they're going to be diverting it away from Donna and Roberts Bay, restoring its watershed back to what it historically was, which was much smaller. So the amount of fresh water getting into Donna and Roberts Bay is going to go way down. So we're kind of excited to see if we'll see a change in the seagrass. But we did see actually a pretty substantial increase in Donna and Roberts Bay, 48% gain over the last 2 years. It's really good news for that little estuary. I mean, we're talking 15 acres, but for Donna and Roberts Bay, that's a big deal. So we did want to call that out, show folks that. All right, the last estuary I wanted to show you, just kind of to give you the regional perspective, is Charlotte Harbor. Now, Charlotte Harbor has a little bit of a different story than the other estuaries. As you saw from the table at the beginning of the Suncoast part of this, it was the only estuary in the Suncoast region that were totally lost, a real loss. And so here is just another way to look at it, which is from the segment perspective. And there are a lot of different segments within Charlotte Harbor. It's a very large estuary. You've got 2 big rivers, Mayaca and East River, flowing into it. And so a lot of fresh water. It's also a very dark estuary. There's a lot of organics that come in. If you've ever been on the Peace River, you know it's a very nice tea-colored river. So there's light limitation just from the amount of organic matter that's coming down these rivers. Charlotte Harbor used to be really the golden child of the Suncoast. 2016, again, we saw record levels of seagrass, but even going all the way back to 1988, we never really saw any big loss in recovery. And so unfortunately, we did see a big loss in 2020, and that was due in large part to that red tide event, which we have not recovered from in this area. You can see losses are kind of spread out across the entire harbor. So we're working on that with the estuary program there, trying to come up with ways to help that system. So overall,
yes, Brian. All right.
Suncoast mostly gains, except for Charlotte Harbor. So we're encouraged by that. And yeah, that's it. That was well, the other slide is just, again, just to reiterate, like this is not an all-inclusive slide, but we can't do it without our partners. So big shout out to many of you in this room who are intimately familiar with how we map and helping us make a better map. So, I'll stop talking.
Your presentation is also going to be online, isn't it?
Yeah, it's available for you guys to go. Yes.
So I think the process that you guys go through every 2 years is incredible, so involved. And with the rise in AI, I'm just wondering, have you guys talked about opportunities to potentially incorporate AI and being able to maybe better look into those areas, maybe have a, I don't know, help training it using your past maps and being able to use more like fine tooth comb, to point out seagrass areas?
Yeah, in 2018, we were ready to move into what we call a semi-automated process. So it's machine learning. Didn't do that because it was right around the time that we started to see real change. So remember, one of the most important aspects of these maps is consistency, because we're comparing year after year. And so by changing technology, you risk losing that consistency. And we didn't want to do that at a time when we were seeing real loss, like we knew something bad was happening. So now we're a few years removed from that period, and we are starting to look into that again and seeing how we can leverage that automated classification system to help produce these maps quicker. Into a comparison, a side-by-side comparison for Tampa Bay 2018, and actually we got some pretty good results. The one area that we still have a lot of issues with is when you get into that sparse patchy seagrass. You know, it's just like, you know, if you're mapping a forest, at what point, you know, where do you cut off the space between the trees to where it's not? Do that more accurately using an automated classification system. But that has impacts on how we then compare historical data.
Right. And I don't want it to substitute, you know, the
Yeah.
work you guys put into it necessarily, but I think it could be like that side-by-side comparison. And
Yeah.
I think there's been leaps and bounds in the past, you know, 7 years. So it could just be interesting, even if it's just to point out some of those areas that you need to go out and check. 100%.
Technology has existed and it's only getting better. The real choke point in that is training your model. You've got to use real data and you've got to capture all the different nuances that as a human and with your level of expertise and experience, you can gauge. But no, I'm a big believer in that. I think that's the direction that we're heading. The other thing I'll add to that for technology is we're also, you know, constantly working with to look at the use of satellite imagery. I think there's a huge potential using satellite imagery now. You can get really high resolution imagery. But the problem is I don't have a satellite that's at my beck and call when the conditions are right. I can't just push a button and help the satellite collect again. So there's some logistical challenges with that. But again, it's and to your point earlier, to fill that gap, that's an option right there.
That was exactly what my hand was up about over AI. So thank you for asking that question, because I feel like that's how, like, we're gonna have to marry it at some point in time. That, and just starting that now feels like a good option.
Great.
And I know that AI has a big carbon footprint, so I just want to acknowledge that. And I think we're gonna have to figure out ways to help, make up for that. Conservation efforts, yeah.
Meyenberg Tampa Bay Estuary Program. So we have invested in looking at, because to Chris's point, Ed would like to be able to give you annual seagrass acreage estimates. And so we have worked with the University of South Florida to use satellite imagery to see if we can produce products that are comparable. And I think the answer is it's not there yet. It's not really comparable, but if you go at tvep.org into the library and look, you can see some of the interim products that we're trying to advance. But that's the goal, is that we could get there. I just don't think we're there yet.
Okay, well, this has been an excellent presentation. Will you be hanging around a little bit if people have some personal questions they want to ask you? Because I really want to hear at this meeting from each of you as to what's going on. And right now, Alana has something very important she's going to present. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm happy to stick around, and I mean, like I said, I could talk all day about this. There's a lot of information here. We just didn't get to it all. So anybody.
You just brushed the surface. I know there's a lot of depth.
But you're right. I mean, the real important part of this product is now we have to ask the why question, and ultimately, most importantly, what do we do about it? So,
Thank you so much.
thank you.
All right, Alana, would you mind giving your presentation, please?
be going into a little bit about the history of the agency. It's been a while since I've done that, and I know we have some members. I'm gonna bring up the idea of creating a 5-year strategic plan for the agency, and then also gonna talk about our 40th anniversary, which is this year, and a celebration we wanna have in the fall. So, just a quick little history, and I have a video clip I want to play for you, and I know our council members have seen this beginning clip because I gave them this history back in April. But I think it's important to kind of go back to our roots and why the agency was first created. I think it gives us perspective as to why it's so important. And it's been brought up by both of our presenters today, and sort of what was the state of the Bay back in the 70s. And it was kind of weak. They say that the stench was so bad from the Bay that it would tarnish silver in the homes along Bayshore Boulevard. And it was a lot of rotting algae. They say you had, 6 feet of algae before you would hit the bottom. So these deep, dense mats. And a lot of that was because of untreated sewage and nutrients going into the Bay, right? So my 60 minutes clip, I think, is from the 70s. And I think the first few minutes, I just want to play for you all. I think it gives some good perspective.
Lana were here, he would say there's a flipper up there.
We did test this before the meeting. It works. As soon as I get up here, something happens. Maybe I get out of it. Okay, well, at a very high level, we were dredging our wetlands, right? We were building our little finger canals and really developing our coasts. Once we had, these packaged sewage treatment plants, they weren't doing too great of a job, and so a lot of sewage going into the Bay.
What began in St. Petersburg as a sleepy retirement center has mushroomed out to the horizons now. Everybody, it seems, is beckoning the speculator. 10 years ago, much of this land in Hillsborough County was covered with citrus groves and pastures. But the farm is giving way to gas stations and drive-ins. The lures that brought people on down in the first place, white sand and the blue Gulf, is being walled in by the high-rise. What is left is being boxed in by the trailer or hemmed in by row on row of bricks and mortar. It all adds up to an urban sprawl that some experts forecast will, in a few short years, become the next Los Angeles, with an onslaught of people, all of them looking for some place to live in the sun, all competing for the same resources. For instance, water. St. Petersburg ran out of drinking water over 50 years ago. They pumped their wells until they hit salt water. So the only thing to do was to pump drinking water out of neighboring counties like Hillsborough. There is not enough water in Hillsborough County anymore. Just 3 years ago, if I'd been standing right here, I would have been up to my ankles in Lake Rogers. But with all of the new building in Hillsborough County and Pinellas County next door, Lake Rogers is becoming a small pond, and the folks here tell us the more new building, the lower the lakes. And the land around here shows the effects of all the pumping. The water-sensitive cypress trees are keeling over by the thousands. Bill Sonnenberg, after what began in St. Petersburg as a sleepy
Okay, well, let's just, I guess, keep moving along.
Is that, can we watch that? Like, can we download that video?
Yeah,
Can be
it's a
available?
60-minute segment from like back in the '70s. Um,
So we've seen a lot in the last 40 years.
Okay. So, okay, I will send out the video so you all can watch it. But essentially they go on a little tour and they show, we have all these massive developments, but the infrastructure just wasn't keeping up with that and this sort of unbridled growth. And so a lot of nutrients going into the bay. We had a lot of algae, right? That essentially decimated a lot of our seagrass, lost a lot. And I think from that, I think we started to recognize and we started to act on it. You had this groundswell of activism from students, from environmental activists. There were several conferences. One was branded "Who is Killing Tampa Bay." You had bumper stickers, "Save Our Bay." And then in 1984, with the support of local governments and the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, the Florida legislature formed the Tampa Bay Management Study Commission to devise a plan. And then the Future of Tampa Bay report was completed in 1985. And that was the first comprehensive management blueprint. And it was created with input from both government and industry stakeholders who recognized the need for a new entity to advocate on behalf of the Bay. And so Commissioner Jan Platt advanced the idea of creating a Bay management agency with RPC director at the time. And that's how the ABM, the Agency on Bay Management, was born. It was a 40-member committee of scientists, government, and industry representatives, environmentalists, and fishing interests. So this new advisory group held its first meeting in September of 1985. And Platt was the Watchdog Group's first chairman, and she held that position for nearly a decade. So, we quickly mobilized to tackle the issues of the day. It was the ABM that took on the powers of TECO to thwart the utilities plan to build a power plant on Cockroach Bay. It was the ABM that lobbied for a ban on shrimp trawling in the bay, and it was also the ABM that encouraged Hillsborough County to create an artificial reef program. The ABM pushed for saltwater fishing licenses, seagrass monitoring, and a pollution recovery trust fund. And ABM thrust stormwater runoff into the spotlight. At the time, it was still largely treated as a flood control issue. In 1999, it was the Regional Planning Council that created the specialty license plate, the tarpon tag, and it was the ABM that pushed for the legislation that created the Surface Water Improvement Management Program, the SWIM program, and designating Tampa Bay as a priority water body. And then it was the ABM that set its sights on Washington and helped to push for the new estuary program and getting Tampa Bay the designation of very national significance. It lobbied hard for that nomination, and in 1990, Tampa Bay was accepted into the National Estuary Program. So we have this incredible history of accomplishments, and can't forget our Bay soundings, back in 2002 is when it started. And so we've tried to continue the legacy, and recently, you all were involved in expanding the boundary of the ABM. So now it's the Agency on Bay and Coastal Management. And we want to continue working on these issues. And we still have an incredible group of people and organizations involved in this city. Very diverse people. And I want to take a moment to recognize some of our newest members. We have Commissioner Chris Bowles with Hillsborough County, Kate Massenbrook with UF-IFAS Florida Sea Grant. We have Commissioner Tal Sadiq from Manatee County. We also are now joined by Councilwoman Lisa Gonzalez-Moore with Bradenton, Councilor Thomas Barnhorn with City of Seminole, Diego Guerra from the Hillsborough County Planning Commission, and then Eric Plage with MacDill Air Force Base. So we're continuing to grow. And I think all the organizations involved recognize the importance of this committee and make sure they have representatives serving on it. I really like this quote. You know, ABM has made it possible to have honest discussions. They come to a consensus that something is good or bad. It creates a political climate for policymakers to make decisions. So we have in the room, you know, both the policymakers and you know, the decision makers, as well as the scientists that are on the ground doing this kind of work. And I think that that is, you know, so unique to this committee. You know, we're not breaking them up into different committees. We're trying to bring you all together and really take action. And so speaking of action, you know, we want to continue carrying on that legacy of accomplishments. And so we thought one way of doing that is developing a 5-year strategic plan for so you know, that would outline some of our goals and our objectives for the next 5 years. And it would help serve as a roadmap to our success so we can get back to, you know, creating actions that we have a long history of. So we can define a vision, we can set some objectives, identify strategies for how to get there, and then action plans on how we can do it together. So if you all support this idea of creating a strategic plan, then we can continue these discussions over the next several weeks to develop one. So generally, what do you all think? Thumbs up this idea? I think it'll kind of move us out from this traditional sort of approach, at least the more recent approach we've had of just, you know, presentation, maybe we have a few questions and everyone leaves. And then, you know, we come back a few months later and the same thing. You know, I want us to move more into action and actually, you know, really accomplishing things like we used to do. So I think this is one way of getting there. Okay, and the last thing I want to bring up is that, you know, this year is, I think, a big milestone, which, you know, the ABCM is turning 40. And so we want to have some sort of a celebration in the fall. We're looking at 2 dates, September 5th or the 26th. Actually, I think it's very appropriate considering our first meeting was in September of 1985. So those are both Fridays. And so I wanted to turn it over to you all and just make sure that the 5th or the 26th doesn't interfere with any big conferences or other events that are going on, because we want to try and get all of you to attend and, you know, maybe invite someone from your boards or you know, a colleague or someone that we want to create champions out of you all, and really help you bring this work back to the people who can, you know, also make action. And so I think this is a good opportunity to introduce people to the ABCM and then just celebrate all that we've been able to accomplish over the years. How does the 5th and the 26th look? Yeah.
26 is the Florida League of Cities Legislative Policy Committees during that day, so depends on the time of day.
Okay, we were thinking the later afternoon one, like 2 to 4.
That works.
Yeah, okay. Sounds good to you all? General thumbs up, yes? Okay, so I hope to see every one of you there. If we pick the 5th, that will be before our next meeting, but we will send out a confirmation to you all very soon, an invitation. Just giving you the details. We're still kind of shoring up where it's going to be and, you know, the time and all that. So, okay, great. So I look forward to that. And then one other thing I want to point out is that we were hoping to create a video, and we would like to interview you all, or those who are willing to be interviewed, compile that into a commemorative video, just highlighting some of the previous work of the ABCM, and then also where you guys, you know, a vision for the future and where you would like to see this committee go. And so if you are willing to be interviewed, and you don't have to be a current member, we also want to reach out to past members. If you're willing to be interviewed, then I have a sign-up sheet in the where you signed in this morning. And also, before I forget, please make sure you sign in before you leave. So if you are willing to be interviewed, please put your name down. I think after this meeting, at least Leslie and I, maybe I can get Megan to join us. And we can at least take, each one of us can take one person. I always like set up little interview spots. So if you're willing to do it today, that'd be great. Roger, I'm hoping you would stick around so we can interview you. And if we can't get to you today, then if you sign up, we'll reach out and we'll set up a time where we can meet with you and do an interview. So it's okay if you're a newer member. We'll tailor the questions to you so we can ask more about, what the value you see in the APCM today and where you'd like to see it go in the future. So don't be afraid if you're not a long time member. So that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And I look forward to celebrating 40 years.
So you're,
Just a couple questions. if I may.
yes, ma'am,
Who's
but you're
that?
going, just before you do, you're going to let everybody know the specifics.
Yes. I just wanted to hear from you all that those two dates were okay, and then we'll work on confirming one. I'll send you all an invitation very soon. Yeah, Sally.
Is that outline online or listed, or is it subject to be updated? Because I actually have some more information. Going through my archives and I found some prehistory. I don't know how many of you know that in 1968, there was a conference sponsored by the University of South Florida that recommended a Baywide Management Committee. The Florida legislature in 1970 passed a local act creating the Tampa Bay Conservation and Development Commission. It never met. But I was, I've been involved since before the beginning, and I found I was able to find an outline of some information. So I thought that might be kind of interesting. The other thing that I was thinking about, Chris, when you were doing your presentation, it was because of when the Swim Act was passed in 1987, Tampa Bay was the first swim priority water body. And that was because of us. That was because of our work. So when I hear you talking about that, I'm thinking and then the estuary program was because of us, because of our work. So I think it's really important documenting that kind of information, because I don't know a lot of people realize that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think there's an opportunity to add a timeline on our website, the APCM website. And then obviously we want to capture some of that in the video too.
We also might want to add some of the people that are no longer with us, like Robin Lewis and George Henderson and Jan Platt. I'm sure you can think of others.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, Commissioner.
Commissioner Sadiq, Manatee County. I really like the idea of the 5-year strategic plan, trying to push my own county government to do it, because it gives us a goal to work towards. Here are the metrics, here are things that we want to look out for and want to build towards. Every business, nonprofit I've worked with has them, and it gives you great long-term vision and goals. So one bit of feedback there, just my personal opinion, but I think a check-in every year, or maybe a half year, turn a half year up, halfway mark, just doing some kind of a review to let us know, hey, how are we doing on our goals? Do we need to pivot a little bit, just so we're not saying we're stuck with a 5-year plan, but that we are modulating where needed? Just food for thought.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you for that feedback.
And let me piggyback on what you're saying. I think one of the important things, Sally Thompson again, about what you're saying is when the estuary program came about, there was a lot of discussion, do we really need an ABM anymore? And I think, or an ACM anymore, because but we don't exactly do the same thing. So I think with a 5-year plan where you show a broader picture, that shows the importance of our effort as well.
Okay, well, Lana, you're gonna let everybody know the time and everything else, but in the meantime, I also noted that there's going to be a video produced. And if any of you don't want your face in the picture, you need to let her know, because you don't know when they're gonna pop up and get all your stuff. Just giving you a heads up.
Yeah, yes. But please do let us know if you are willing to be in the video. That's really what we're looking for. We need to have a diversity of people in there.
Okay, well, that leads me to the, okay. Yeah.
And I just wanted to congratulate you on the idea, you and the team, for having a 5-year management plan that will maybe help us move from information to action items with, you know, definite goals and ideas about what can we actually do. Because it's wonderful for ACBM to share information. I think it's one of our main purposes. But if we don't use this information and get it out back into where it's useful, you know, it's kind of, it easily forgotten. So I just really want to agree, Commissioner, that that's something that's really important. Very grateful for you bringing that forward.
Thank you, and I will not take the,
And all these notes,
yeah,
she's gonna be putting those all together, and eventually there may be some issues that we vote on specifically, or we get additional input. Also, we have the editor sitting next to you of Bay Soundings. She's going to be promulgating a lot of this. But in addition, Mayor Woody Brown and I both are on the RPC, and we're taking this stuff back to them. And when it's appropriate, we're just gonna ask them to, you know, these are active members in the cities and counties. We don't just want to sit around and talk about how great all these groups are. We want to take this information and take it to the people who can do something. And I'm personally very excited to see that, to see the enthusiasm.
and I will not take all
Make
the
sure it
credit.
happens.
I will
She's
take all
got
the
all
credit for
these.
the 5-year strategic plan idea. That was actually my colleague and our planning director, Sarah's idea. But I think it's a great one. I was expressing my frustration of, you know, our Resiliency Coalition is making some great strides and, you know, carrying out the tasks they've laid out and the Regional Resilience Action Plan. I'm like, we need a way to do that kind of work. And so that's where we had the idea of the strategic plan. So I think it is, you know, a way to push us more towards action, and not just discussion, although the discussion is a wonderful thing about this committee, getting everyone together in this open forum.
Okay, I am very conscious of time, because I know you all are busy. But I would like to impose on each of you, at least, for a minute, if you can, want to go around the room and ask you to update us as to what's important from your organization. Don't need a speech, but just some kind of a summation so that we can be aware of what's going on in your communities. And also, if any of you have got some ideas now or very soon after this meeting, let Alana know, because we want to have presentations from as many of you as want to or will participate. Pauline, you were talking about what's going on in Pasco County. Our commissioner from Manatee is aware of some things, and I go, but I don't want to do the presentation. I want to get it from you. So I want to start down here, and let's quickly go around the room. We usually get out at 12, but I think if you spare a few minutes, we can make it a little past that. So everyone has a chance, okay? So can we start with you? Say your name.
And Mark Luther, University of South Florida College of Marine Science. Also work with the NOAA Ports Network around Tampa Bay. I guess our biggest issue is with the NOAA port system. We've lost a substantial portion of our funding from Hillsborough County Phosphate Severance Trust. And we're trying to figure out how to keep things going. We've got good reserve, but we have a plan in place to try to look for other sources of funding. And in the meantime, we're continuing to repair some damages from hurricanes that are lingering. And we're expanding the system to put salinity sensors in around the port to deal with changes in density during high freshwater inflow periods that affect underkeel clearance for some petroleum carriers, some big cruise ships. Mr. Fluke across the table can attest to some of these issues as well.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
John Elving, Friends of the Hillsborough River. We have two issues right now. One is coming to an end, and that is the fact that the upper river is being used by manatees in April, May, and June for mating and calving. And we have a lot of baby manatees on the river, so enforcement of speeds in the river is a prime issue. The second is coming up, and that is stormwater. Sadly, there is still an enormous amount of trash flowing into the river, especially the first week that rainy season starts, and we really need to do something about that.
Okay, keep that feedback coming so that we know and stay updated. Maybe some things come around from that. Kevin?
Kevin Shelton with Black Beach. As Maya brought up, one of the things that we're focusing on our clients is the natural channel design, flood pavilions. We're just finishing up the big study for county right now. And really concerned about the knee-jerk reaction to just dredge everything. It's gonna be a problem.
And Paul, supposed to be representing Hillsborough County at large. I think one of the things that our county is dealing with is we're still recovering from the hurricanes last year, last October. And although most of our county is sort of inland, we were really affected by the winds. And this is Hurricane Milton. It's just a real impact on our forest, and I think that that's something that we need to be concerned about. Also, the tremendous amount of development that's happened in Hillsborough County, particularly the South County area, and then up toward Pasco County. This is just affecting traffic, affecting life, affecting our quality of life situations, and those are major problems for us.
Vicky is gonna tell you what she does, but she's the one. A lot of you need to talk to.
Base soundings. I'm taking really good notes. It's editor at base soundings. If you're thinking of something you didn't bring up in a meeting, please reach out.
Yes, sir.
But shameless plug for Camp Electric Manatee Viewing Center. We're going to be in the running for USA Today's 10 best free attractions. So if you feel like getting on the website and supporting us, we would appreciate it. Currently in second, we finished, I think, the last 2 years. So, there's some very animated discussions at work about that. But on a positive Manatee side, the Manatee Forum was, I think, 2 weeks ago now, and the FWC is going to launch the regional partnership team for this area. So we should be starting meetings on that next month. Focus of how do we transition manatees off of power plants. So hopefully at some point in the future, we'll have an update on what developments are coming out of that team.
Kathleen Jonas, Tampa Bay Water. One thing is after being down for about a year, our seawater desalinization plant is back up and running as before, which is co-located with Tico's Big Bend plant. And we're currently producing between 11 and 12 million gallons a day from that facility. Stormwater, of course, is very important to us because we also have 2 surface water intakes on the Alafia River and the bypass canal. And the Tampa Bypass Canal was built as a flood conveyance, not as a water supply. So we're always source water protection is very important to us for the Tampa Bypass Canal and the Hillsborough River. We have a hydrobiological monitoring plan, which we look at water quality, chlorophyll, salinity, et cetera. And we're currently looking at what happened during the storms from last year. We actually lost a couple pilings also, which were in the process.
Maya Burbs, Tampa Bay Estuary Program. Our Bay Mini Grant Program is currently open for applications from members of the community for up to $5,000 for ideas that implement protection, restoration, and education within the Tampa Bay watershed. So please help us get the word out. We're also very keenly interested in moving beyond just documenting the decline in Old Tampa Bay and getting towards action and solutions. And one of the things that we're looking to do is to try and schedule a boat tour with elected officials and decision makers. We tried earlier this season and didn't get the kind of response that we were hoping. So we're now looking at a date in August. to hopefully get folks out there. So if you know of anyone, we're looking for folks that are like sort of high up the food chain in terms of decision making. Please reach out to me and let me know. I have a list of folks that I've been reaching out to directly, but would like to put that out there for the group. And then the last thing I want to mention is atmospheric deposition of nitrogen is the second most common source of nitrogen pollution to the bay. And we're working to set up an atmospheric deposition monitoring station within the watershed. Currently, we rely on data collected from the Verna Wellfield in Sarasota County. So if your organization has anyone in an air quality monitoring division that is interested and would like to be part of a working group on that, please reach out to me and let me know.
Thank you. Natasha?
I'm Natasha Dickrell from Mills County. We had a lot going on, but with some of the big things, a lot to do with grant funding and planning with all of the hurricane recovery funds coming down the line. With that, we're also trying to help citizens with streamlining permitting, specifically for coastal construction and whatnot. So we're doing some special authorizations for docks and whatnot, but we are completely inundated, as many of you probably are in other counties. We're also forthcoming with grant planning and capital improvements, you know, working and focusing on septic to sewer programming throughout our more rural areas, or where we know there's hotspots for I&I and other efforts. Some of them are straight up laterals, and then, you know, more targeting, you know, individuals that are low income or vulnerable in certain cases. And then also focusing on large stormwater projects, like bigger tracts in some of the more upland areas that are feeding into the coastal water bodies, as we've talked a lot, and land acquisition. Trying to make sure that we have enough resources and whatnot to be able to maintain open spaces and what that pursues. It also seems like maybe something for the committee to consider, how we're acquiring and transitioning to open space. So if we're using grant funds, a lot of the provisions require open space, but there's also other information coming out about how open space that is in floodplains and how floodplains should be used versus recreation or just floodplain, based on public health and some of the other stuff. And you guys saw there was a webinar from NOAA this week that was kind of tiptoeing into some of those benefits and concerns that we should keep an eye on. So maybe land acquisition and how that's used, land use. And then last, just personally for me, from the data monitoring side and environmental management, there's a lot of data out there. We kind of talked about red tide, so trying to focus on how to get data available so that it's not just 1 month, using that as an example, but just bringing all these data sets together and data comparability and whatnot, so that we can have them available for people to digest and tell some of these stories. So, thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
Terry Fluke, Tampa Bay Pilots Association. To sort of expound a little bit or expand a little bit on what Dr. Luther was saying about NOAA. We have been lobbying heavily over the last few months, both state level and national level. We have a national association of pilots or pilot groups to preserve the NOAA services that we use on a daily basis. It can be ports, it can be National Weather Service, it can be ocean mapping, it can be post-storm recovery, which NOAA is active in. Again, important to us, pilots are driving very large ships within Tampa Bay. We use those services every day. And they're critical services for everybody in this room, individual and collective. So thank you, Mark, for all you've helped us with.
Joe?
Self-interest.
Joseph Quinn, Southwest Florida Water Management District. I'll give a shout out. We're actually in our development of our 2025 Regional Water Supply Plan. We do the plan every 5 years. It covers our entire district. So we'll have a couple of workshops coming up. It'll be online on the 25th and 26th of this month. We just posted the plan, and actually people here will probably be getting emails for our public comment period. So it's out for public comment right now through September 1st. Pretty extended period there. So I'd encourage everybody to, attend the workshops coming up. I'll give the information to Alana. To the agency.
Any of you that have events, be sure to let Alana know, because we can put it on our website. Allison, did you have something to introduce yourself?
Oh, hi everyone. I'm Allison Bednar. I'm the GIS analyst at TVRPC. I started in February. It's very nice to see all you today.
Kara?
Good morning or good afternoon now. I'm Kara Woodser. I'm the planning director for the Planning Council.
You all know Chris? Ryan?
Brian Gandy with the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program. I think something that might be of express interest to the group is our water quality protection plan that we're finishing right now. It actually started as a reasonable assurance plan because of the degraded period we're in from 2013 to 2022 for water quality in our bay systems. A lot of that was, attributed to, we had red tides during the time, but also we had almost 1 billion gallons of wastewater overflows during that period. It started out in 2021 as a reasonable assurance plan because we were on the cusp of regulatory action, but the municipalities during that time took a lot of since then have put about $400 million into wastewater facilities, going to AWT, lining pipes, the whole kind of slew of things to get those under control. And during that period, from about 22 to the recent evaluation period in 2023, 24, our lower base systems were not impaired. So we actually came out of that and we had to transition this to a water quality protection plan. But the nice thing about it is in that, and what we've done is listed almost $400 million worth of local projects that would continue. Each of them has ranked with it the amount of nitrogen or phosphorus reduction within it to help the municipalities really focus those projects that have direct impacts on the bay. So we're finishing that water quality protection plan up here soon. That's something we may be able to bring back and present and showcase that.
Because listening to all of you so far, I'm hearing all kinds of presentations, meetings.
Well, it's great because you can see that direct effect of those changes on reducing about 12 tons of nitrogen going into the bay. And we have the improvements in the upper bay of seagrass, but also that a lot of that you can see, and it's not just the water going in, the wastewater going in, the AWT treated water, but also the application of reclaimed water on the landscape and how that's actually reduced to help reduce the amount of nitrogen. So there's a whole story.
Forward to hearing more about that. Yeah. Would you like to introduce yourself so people know who you are?
Hi all, I'm Megan Blanchard, coastal ecologist for Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. Megan.
Okay, Michelle.
Michelle Centra, Florida Fish and Wildlife.
Hi, Amelia Misavage from Florida Fish and Wildlife. We don't have any set updates, but just some reminders. It is in the middle of sea turtle season. So if you guys are on the beach this 4th of July season, we just ask that if you see any kids digging holes at China, once they leave, you patch those holes back up with the sand so turtles don't get stuck.
And we're also in the heat of our imperiled beach nesting bird nesting season. And so especially with the July 4th holiday coming up, if you guys are seeing any disturbances in your areas, make sure that you report that to our hotline. It helps us as biologists work with law enforcement to have them run routine routes on beaches that are experiencing those high disturbance levels. So keep a lookout for our posted nesting areas. And then also, look out for nesting areas on construction sites and rooftops as well. We recently had a successful nesting pair of American oyster catchers out on the Howard Franklin on one of the FDOT construction sites. So that's exciting. And that's it.
Sally.
Sally Thompson, Tampa Bay Conservancy. One of the things that the Agency on Bay, and now Agency on Bay and Coastal Management, has been supportive of for many, many years is the state, local, whatever, land acquisition, protection, restoration programs and management programs. I'm now chairing the Hillsborough County Greenways and Trails Committee. We have, the county commission approved an updated plan last year after 20 years. And we're meeting on a quarterly basis. Next week is Wednesday night is our quarterly meeting at County Center. So if anybody's interested, see me, or I'll let you know. Also, there's an initiative connected with the state Greenways and Trails efforts, which I've been involved with. But right now, there's something called the Florida Gulf Coast Trail, which is you're shaking your head. Anyway, a former county commissioner, Charles Hines, from Sarasota County, who was hired by the Trust for Public Lands to coordinate, and it's going all the way from, I believe, Punta Gorda or Charlotte County, all the way up to Hillsborough County, connecting different trails and greenways, and then coming across the Howard Franklin Bridge, and ultimately to the Pinellas Trail, and all over the state, a whole statewide network. A committee has been set up that is meeting, and the next meeting is going to be the 30th of July. If anybody's interested in knowing more about it, we want to get all the entities that are interested involved.
Well, I'm gonna ask you to please get with Alana and give her more info.
I will.
But I'm gonna skip to Mayor Woody and then come right back to you, because he has another engagement he has to get to. You know how it is with these important matters.
Thank you. Apologies. I have a ribbon cutting in 22 minutes in Largo, so I'd like to try to get there. Maya, sign me up. Just give me a little bit advance notice and I'll be on the boat. Thank you. I know we're kind of going back and forth on that. But just a couple things. We're getting ready for hurricane season, probably like most cities. And I certainly appreciate the comments on not making all of our watersheds straight ditches. To that effect, we purchased about 30 acres on the McKay Creek watershed, just north of Taylor Park, where Lake Taylor overflowed 8th Avenue and flooded Largo Hospital during Milton, and flooded many homes down there. So just upstream from Largo Hospital, there was a 30-acre golf course. It was defunct. We purchased that 30 acres and we'll build a passive nature-based stormwater retention area as well as treatment area. So it's early on. It's still a golf course. It's an old golf course, so it's growing and stuff, but it's going to be a passive park as well. But we're going to make it so it can flood with stormwater if it has to help protect the stuff downstream, and also have nature-based treatment in there for that watershed as well. So that's an exciting thing for us. We have money that's in some budget in Tallahassee right now for the planning of that. And if it makes it to the finish line, we'll be very happy. I do apologize. I have to go because I wanted to hear the rest of y'all, but I'm sure that I'll watch the video.
We're very fortunate to have him. Really. Thank you, Woody. Thank you. Brett?
Okay, hello, everyone. Brett Urson with EPC Hillsborough County. Just a couple quick things. Our 2025 Pollution Recovery Fund grant cycle is in full process right now. This year we received 10 applications for cleanup efforts and improvement in Hillsborough County, totaling about $700,000 in grant requests. I do a shameless plug to our water quality monitoring program. Many people might not know that we've got one of the longest continuous running water quality monitoring program data sets in the nation. We've got over 50 years of water quality data that we've been collecting over the years. So just a quick shout out. I know all of us use this information and it's very important.
Perhaps you can present that to us sometime. Commissioner?
All right, Commissioner Tal, Manatee County. I represent the entire coastline for our county. Couple of quick updates. Stormwater management's important. I won't spend too much time on it, but we are spending quite a bit of time turning our watersheds into ditches, I suppose. So I'll talk to my board about that next week. Resiliency is a big topic. So we are in the midst of our vulnerability assessment, which focuses just on county infrastructure, not quite neighborhoods, but county infrastructure. Things like stormwater ditches, stormwater systems, roads, that type of thing. We'll be done with that next year, spring, but the draft is going to be done this year. Clear cutting that was talked about earlier, our board has passed a number of restrictions effectively reducing the number of acres that you can clear cut. And then we've also implemented standards to require replanting of seeds, weeds, what have you, on those parcels, plus more continuous watering. So we're seeing hundreds of acres at a time getting clear cut. We're south of Hillsborough County. We've had the number 7 fastest growing zip code in the country just south of you all. So we're seeing that there. Something to think about. And then we have a number of small, medium-sized projects related to living shorelines, seagrass replanting efforts and more throughout my district. So trying to make small steps there. And then lastly, just something to think about. We're seeing a lot of the development trends in our county. We're looking to slow that down a little bit. We increased impact fees from 2015 rates to 2025 rates. So we have about 90 more days until, or less than 90 days until they take effect. And we're also worried about Senate Bill 180 and 250 from a few years ago, which short version of that, if you were hit by any hurricane in the last few years, you are no longer allowed to implement more burdensome restrictive requirements in your comprehensive plan. So we've received 5 letters from state agencies threatening to get rid of us as commissioners over that. So we are in the midst of a pretty big review for comp plans. So just something to keep in mind. It's something we're working with state agencies on. So you might see me here, you might not in a couple of months. I guess we'll see.
We'll look forward to hearing more about
Thank you.
Pauline.
Pauline Weaver with Pasco County. I would echo that last comment that you just made because that is, we are on the struggle bus with that. So we'll help you. I can guarantee you our county wants to be at that discussion. And the only other word, I've already said a couple of things there, is compound flooding on resiliency and our lack of study on that in the area. I haven't heard hardly anything, and I've been seeing some studies coming from the other coast on it. So I would love to learn more about compound flooding and the impacts that this area, because we've only had hurricanes that have come one way and the other. And if we get one that's the perfect storm that hits us with both rain and surge, it's a whole nother game on the table. So I would love to learn about that.
Okay, thank you.
David Glicksberg with Hillsborough County. And as Kevin mentioned, the county's having a comprehensive study done on flooding, and I share the same concerns about, or any, as all of us here, any flood control projects that get put on the books or to be implemented, hopefully will use as much water quality BMPs as possible along with those flood control projects, because they're gonna need it and not just straight ditch things out to the bay. Along those lines, the county, as well as others here, is anticipating receiving several $100 million in disaster recovery funds. And so they have a survey on their website, the Hillsborough County website, for people to participate in to give feedback as to how they like those funds utilized.
Ben Copeland with Mosaic. Yeah, following the busy storm season last year, we've really been focusing on storm preparedness. For the upcoming year, we have a water inventory that we manage. So we've been working really the last 6 months, all of this year to analyze that and forecast what's expected to be a busy season again this year. And have been really working diligently to implement a number of additional projects to increase our surge capacity if there is any additional storms or rainfall events this year. So that's really been our focus. And given that effort, we feel like we're in a good spot moving forward into the rainy season.
Do we have any? Yes,
Very sorry, I forgot one, and I think it's very important.
please.
August 27th, SwiftMud will have the hopefully final presentation of the third 5-year study for the Hillsborough River Recovery Strategy. It's a process that started in 2000 when Friends of the River actually challenged the minimum flow that was set by the city of Tampa. And it's resulted in 3 5-year studies, and the final results will be presented by SwiftMud on August 27th. You should have all received an invite to that, because my email says that 47 members of Regional Planning Council have received, including Maya, an invite. So
Okay, make sure that you, get them to Alana because she's
we'll do.
representing us on the
I'll
council.
forward that to Alana.
My name, as you see, is Barb Todd. I have the honor of serving as chair of this and being a gubernatorial appointee to the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. Just such an honor to work with you wonderful people, and I'm looking forward to some really great things to come out of this coalition. I'd like you to meet, you've met Alana, and you are a research fellow, right?
Yes.
Tell us quickly about you.
Yes, my name is Mesli. I am a science policy fellow with the Gulf Research Program of the National Academies of Science, and I help Alana plan this meeting and helping plan for the celebration coming up as well. So you can reach out to me as well as Alana for anything you need in this committee.
This is Meslie's last full agency meeting, and she will be dearly missed, yes. But I also have an update. Some of you, I think, attended our workshop last week or the week before, all the days blur together now, where we released, or it was our launch workshop for our coastal master plan. So we received almost $2 million from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to develop a coastal master plan for the Tampa Bay region, and it's modeled off of Louisiana's coastal master plan. They've been able to bring in billions of dollars to help the implementation of projects that have, nature-based solutions and provide, water quality benefits as well as those flood protection benefits as we've all been talking about. And so we are hoping to kind of follow that process and develop a similar plan for our own region. And so this will be a 4-year project, and we're just getting started, and we're looking for stakeholders to join the work groups that'll help in shaping that project. And so if you're interested, please visit the website. You can sign up for those work groups. Right now it's coastaltampabay.org. And I am happy to come to a future meeting and give you all a presentation on what that process looks like in developing the plan and where we can engage you all.
I don't think that you were introduced. Was he introduced? Okay, all right. And I know that this isn't really part of the plan, but I'm always interested in knowing who our audience is. So could you let us know who you are? Some of us know, but.
My name is Morgan Matthews. I'm an emergency management intern. I'm just visiting. I just started my summer internship last.
You're always welcome.
I'm Mary Keith. I'm the conservation chair for Tampa Audubon. So I've been coming pretty regularly because everything that this whole group is doing is very important for our birds. And one thing that I would say is we're just coming to the end. It started in February. The colony nesting birds monitoring program. So we have volunteers. Tampa Audubon sponsors volunteers in Hillsborough County, but there's volunteers that for Pinellas, Pasco, and Polk, and I'm not sure how far it goes, but Audubon, Florida collects data on nesting colonies. And one of the things that I've noticed, and that Jeff Lighty, who is not here today, he's the one who collects the data, has noticed, is that our roseate spoonbill colonies are growing more inland. We had 30-some nests in one site that I monitor in Polk County, and almost as many in the second site. So probably as a response to some of the habitat damage right along the coast, the birds are moving in. Looks like the numbers are still there, but they're changing in response too, so.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Please come again. As a matter of fact, our next meeting date is September the 11th, 2025. So make sure it's on your calendar. Alana will let you know the particulars of the celebration, the 40-year celebration. And then, of course, we have a meeting in December 11. And some of our committees may be meeting in between. But officially, our meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Going next.
If you want some other, that county is
I know
definitely not loud. Did you? Oh.
Yeah, supposed to see you next week.
So much. Yeah, no, I went to